actually recommend those that are in there.
Are we ready? If we could come to order. I'll take the roll call. Mrs. Cannelli is here. Mr. Convertito is present. Mr. Liu is present. Mrs. Gerber is present. Philip Dwyer is present. Mr. Batterbean is present. Mr. Kerry is present. We expect Pam, Mrs. Iacono, to be here. Sue Brand gives her apologies in matter of fact, she might be watching us tonight. She is home recuperating from foot surgery, which happened on Friday. It went very well, and she actually expected to be here on Tuesday, but her recuperation caused her to say it's better if she does not. So we'll look forward to having her back here at the next meeting. If you could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We start tonight with a presentation on everybody's favorite topic, and that's the new state requirement for changing teacher evaluation. So I'll ask Dr. Teitel to introduce the subject and our speaker.
Yes, thank you. The topic is actually twofold. Not only is there a new set of requirements around teacher evaluation, but there's a new set of requirements around administrator evaluation. And administrators is everybody who holds the administrative certification up through the, but not including the superintendent. So you get to use whatever system you want with me, but everybody else falls under administrator. And it's a very complex topic. We've been getting a lot of advice and counsel from CES on this, and so we thought that it would be best to bring in an expert who's been working with districts around the state and working with the state. And so we're really pleased to have Esther Bobwick here from CES. She's got a presentation, and then we'll be able to have some Q&A afterwards. So Esther, come on up, and a few of us that are standing in front of the here are going to move out. So welcome to Fairfield.
I'm going to sit so I can control the keyboard here. Can you hear me okay? I would like to thank you for the opportunity to come and to do this presentation. I am the proud product of the Fairfield Public Schools as a student. I lived in Fairfield for many years as a child in an old farmhouse on Strathfield Road, built in the 1700s. Have many pleasant memories of my tenure here as a student. And lo and behold, I came back as a teacher, and I actually taught at Andrew Ward and Roger Ludlow as a special education teacher. So I am thrilled to be back and to provide this presentation for you. At CES, I'm the Director for Professional Development Services, which means that we provide many different types of professional learning opportunities for the teachers in the CES region, which comprises 17 school districts from Stratford down to Greenwich and out as far as Ridgefield. One of the things that we also do is function as a liaison between the State Department of Education and our school districts and try to provide their voice at the State Department levels so that the State Department is clear what our stakeholders are thinking and what their interests are, where are their concerns, challenges, issues, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to be in that role and to be that voice for our school districts. My presentation tonight is going to focus only on the state guidelines that are now in state statute that are the minimum requirements for a new teacher evaluation plan that any district might submit. And those submissions will happen as of April 15th. Districts are adopting, looking at lots of different national models, but what I'm going to present to you are the minimums that all school districts must comply with. We do believe that, just look at where the, oh, here we go. We do believe that teachers are the most important social capital that we have when we start to think about student learning, and that when teachers are succeeding, students are succeeding. And there's a lot of research out there to demonstrate that. We know we need to support teachers in that vein, and in order to do that, one of the most important things we need to do is to clarify our expectations and to have a common definition of what does good teaching look like. What are we expecting to see in all and every classroom in our school districts? And what might those results look like as we look at student work? In order to support teacher, we have to give them useful information. We have to talk with them about what we see as their strengths and what we see as their areas of development. I can tell you that when I was teaching here in 1970, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, that in fact my building administrator came in the classroom once a year for about 5 minutes, gave me a thumbs up and a checklist, and sent me on my way for my evaluation. I really didn't get the kind of feedback that would have made me a better teacher. Fast forward, here we are in 2013, and we know a lot more about how teachers improve their practice, and giving them direct feedback about their strengths as well as about their areas of development, holding them against a standard and a definition of what is good teaching is really the best way to move ahead. As the state looked at what those expectations might be, they considered a number of design principles. What you see in front of you are the design principles that were the components that led to the agreement at the state level between the State Board of Education and the Peak Committee for what should be in any teacher evaluation plan. That there should be multiple standard-based measures of performance, not just one administrator coming into a classroom for 5 minutes, that we should look at student work, that it should be based on professional judgment and consistency, so that if Karen Parks and I go into a classroom, we both come away with the same judgment, that we're using the same standards, that we're using the same definition of good teaching. We want to make sure we're fostering a dialogue about student learning so that that becomes the focus. Not did I follow my lesson plan to the T, did I lead students to learn what my objective was at that moment in that lesson. We want to encourage aligned professional development, coaching, and feedback to support that student, that teacher growth, so that if it becomes apparent that I do have an area of growth, there is professional development or coaching to support me so that I can get better. So professional learning, professional growth are a big part of what should be in an effective teacher evaluation plan. And we want to make sure that there's feasibility of implementation, that it's something that we can accomplish well, that's not something that's so far-reaching or so impossible that there's just no way we could implement it. So feasibility of what makes for a good teacher evaluation plan is something that we'll talk briefly about in one of the slides. If you have questions, just kind of hold on to them to the end, and I'll make sure that I answer any questions that any of you might have. This little diagram demonstrates that there are multiple components to the teacher evaluation process. 45% comprises student growth and development, 5% represents a whole school learning goal or student feedback, 40% represents the observation of the teacher performance and practice, and another 10% represents parent feedback as stakeholders in the process. A better graphic I would use would be this one, to show that the 45% and 5% represent what we call an outcome rating, which means the student outcome ratings. So those two pieces represent how are my students doing in my classroom based on the goals and objectives I set, based on the curriculum that I teach, and based on the way I teach and who I work with and the resources that I have. So all of that is measured and comes to a 50% outcome rating. At the same time, I have what's called a practice rating, and that comprises 50%. 40% of that are my observations of my primary evaluator coming into my classroom or sitting with me and going through lesson plans, etc. And 10% are peer or parent feedback, and again, I'll go more in detail about that. But those two ratings come together to comprise a summary of my evaluation, or a summarized rating, a final rating at the end. And again, I'm going to show you more about that, but I wanted to explain the chart so you could see how these different components come together. Now, in the past, and I would say this year, as well as many years prior to us, I just want to point out that the 40% is where our focus has been. Classroom observations, how teachers are doing in the classroom, what students are doing in the classroom. And so you can see that it's a much more complex process to plan for when we add all these additional components. So there are three parts to this process. There's a goal setting and planning process, a mid-year check-in, and an end-of-year summative review. And I'll take just a moment to go through each of those processes in just a second. In terms of a timeline, this is what we used this current year for the pilot. We have 10 school districts that are in a pilot who are working with this new set of guidelines. We asked that by November 15th, the goal setting be completed so that all teachers have all of their goals set. We said that by mid-year, in January, February, that a mid-year conference would happen with all teachers and their primary evaluators to review the goals, to look at the progress on the goals, and that by June, all of the assessments must be complete because the superintendent must submit to the commissioner how many evaluations took place and what the aggregate of all those evaluations looks like as a summary. So as I said, there are three different components to the process, and the first component has three parts to it. The first piece, where you see it says orientation process, is very, very important. That's actually in the law, that all teachers must have an orientation to what the process will be, and all administrators will have an orientation as to what their evaluation process will be. And that's been very important to the teachers' unions because they want to make sure that teachers are approaching the goal setting with the right information. So when they sit down to set their goals, they know what they're expected to do, what the goals should look like, what they should be measuring, etc. So we've been offering, it's like a 2 to 3 hour orientation for teachers in our pilot districts to make sure that they are very aware of what this new evaluation process is comprised of. The second part is that the teacher would reflect as they look at their student roster, who's in my class this year, what do I know about those students, what are going to be their needs, how do I design schedules for resources. They need to know really what is the student population that they're going to be working with. They need to be real clear on the curriculum they're working with that year and be prepared to sit down for that last piece, which is the goal setting conference, where they sit with their primary evaluator and come up with the proposed goals. Now, the key on that slide is mutual agreement. The administrator and the teacher work together to decide what those goals will be. The administrator doesn't tell the teacher, this is what you are going to have as a goal. If the teacher comes to the table with, this is what I'd like to have as a goal, and the primary administrator doesn't feel it's rigorous enough or doesn't feel it's attainable, they'll have a conversation and they will reach with a mutual agreement about what those goals might look like. As I said before, in the middle of the year, they'll get back together. They'll have an opportunity to review the progress data to date for each of the goals that the teacher is responsible for. They might be looking at samples of student work. They might be looking at benchmark test scores. They might be looking at portfolios. Depending upon the subject area, the teacher brings that data to the table and they have an opportunity to discuss the progress. It's at this point that they have an opportunity to change the goal. If something's happened in the district, if something has happened within a teacher's classroom that's upset the apple cart, so to speak, or let's say the teacher had to take an emergency leave and now is back and may have not progressed along the curriculum route the way they thought they might have. It's important that teachers understand that that mid-year is an opportunity to change their goals in whatever way necessary. The third component is that end-of-year review, and that has two pieces to it. Teachers complete a self-assessment as to how they think they did on their goals based on the data that they bring to the table, based on the way they had agreed to measure those goals. And then in addition, they have the actual conference where they bring all the artifacts and take a look at what they've accomplished during the year, because these goals are supposed to represent a year's worth of growth for their students as well as for them. There are 4 levels of performance that are the standards that all the primary evaluators will utilize for scoring each teacher, each certified educator: exemplary, proficient, developing, and below standard. And I have to point out that in our current testing system, proficient is a term that's not necessarily wonderful. And so when teachers see this, they get a little nervous, saying, I'm better than proficient. I'm way better than proficient. But in the teacher evaluation planning, proficient is wonderful. It's a great place to be. So we sometimes have to make sure that teachers understand that the word proficient for the teacher evaluation does not equate with the same word proficient that we look at when we're looking at the CMT scores or the other test scores. It's unfortunate that the state decided to use those words. We tried to get them to change it. It was really too late because it was already in state statute, but I just wanted to point that out. Now, this is a slide that gets people a little bit nervous because look at all the goals that all of our teachers have to do every year now. They have to look at either 1 to 3 goals for performance, and that's the piece where their administrator comes into the classroom or provides some other observation of practice. They must set a goal around their parent feedback, the stakeholder feedback. And in the pilot, I would say that most of our pilot districts are doing that by school, not by teacher. So they're coming up with a school-wide parent engagement goal that all the teachers would share equally. The 45% is the newest piece that has everybody a little bit perplexed, and all teachers have to set 2 student learning objectives based on student performance. And then the final 5%, you have a choice between a whole school student learning indicator, which is really just a whole school improvement goal, and or student feedback. You could collect student feedback for that 5% of the goal. Are you confused yet? It does take a while to understand. So another question that continually comes up is, well, how many observations comprise that 40%? This chart represents what the minimum is in order to comply with the new teacher evaluation requirements. First and second year teachers must have at least 3 formal observations, 2 of which include a pre and a post conference. Any teacher that's designated as below standard or developing in that 4-part system that I just showed you in that scale, those folks would also have 3 formal observations, 2 of which include a pre and a post conference. And our proficient or exemplary teacher, which are the majority of the teachers in pretty much any school system, would have at least 3 observation or reviews of practice, of which 1 must be a formal classroom observation. Within that 40%, again, as I said, the teacher can set anywhere from 1 to 3 goals. It must be aligned with the Common Core of Teaching, which is the state guideline for any teacher performance in the state. Any new teacher that comes into the Fairfield Public Schools has to participate in a teacher induction program approved by the state that, again, is based on the Common Core of Teaching. They must identify goals that provide focus for the observations in feedback conversations. As I said, there's another component for that practice rating called the parent or peer feedback, and that's 10% of a teacher's evaluation, and it should be based on parent or peer feedback, which can include surveys. Right now in our 10 pilot districts, I would say that to my knowledge, I think all of them are going with parent feedback. The process can include conducting a whole school parent survey, determining school-level parent goals based on survey feedback, teacher and evaluator identifying 1 related parent engagement goal that helps them to measure progress and determines a teacher's summative rating. And I would tell you that initially, teachers' concerns have been, well, this parent survey, is this a popularity contest? Is it, who do the parents like better? And my answer would be absolutely not. It's does the questions that are represented are things like, do parents participate in the back-to-school night? Do parents feel welcome at the conferences that are held for their children? Do they attend those conferences? We want to try to look at how do parents participate as part of the educational process. And so that's some of the feedback that would come to a school where they would set a goal. Maybe the feedback would relay that the parents aren't real clear on how to find the homework information for their children. So a school could set a whole goal relative to how are we going to better communicate with our parents, how to find the homework assignments, and how to help with those homework assignments. So it's really trying to look at the parents as a stakeholder in the process. It's not trying to create a survey that would end up, as someone might worry, as a popularity contest. So that comprises the 50%, which I just, on the practice rating, that's in the pink. So we still have another 50% represented by two other components. Again, I talked about the 45% is created by two goals, which are called Student Learning Outcomes, SLOs, and each of them is split into half, so we have 22.5%, and then another 22.5%. One of them represents a goal that's set for teachers who have students who are in a tested subject or grade that are either in the CMT or the CAPT, and the other 22.5% are for non-standardized indicators. So if I'm an art and a music teacher, my students don't take the CAPT or the CMT, I'm not responsible for that content. I would have two goals that are based on non-standardized assessments. In that phase, again, we have phase one, where I, as the teacher, am responsible for learning about my students. I want to know what their reading level is. I want to know what they did in terms of their report cards last year and any other assessment data that might be available. I'm going to set goals for student learning. I'm going to monitor my students' progress, and at the end, I'm going to assess those outcomes relative to the goals that I set. Now, within each of those goals, we have another wonderful acronym, thanks to the State Department, called an IAGD. That stands for Indicators of Academic Growth and Development. So for each of my goals, I have to identify the absolute specific criteria by which I'm going to measure my students' progress. I have to identify quantitative targets so that I can measure that progress. And that will help me to demonstrate whether my objective was met or not. And each of those SLOs must have at least one IAGD or one measurement indicator. The second part of that 50% is 5% of a teacher's evaluation, which shall be based on a whole school student learning indicator or student feedback. The purpose of this is that we really do believe teachers are part of a learning community, and as such, their responsible for learning is shared among all of the student staff, the school staff. This measurement is designed to reflect the importance of this shared responsibility. The whole school student learning indicator rating or student feedback rating shall be among 4 performance levels, the same 4 that I already showed you. I would tell you that in the 10-district pilot, I think all of them have gone with the whole school learning indicator. They've chosen a whole school improvement goal that all staff in the building are responsible for. So as they meet that goal, everyone achieves a met goal on that 5%. It doesn't mean you have to. I'm just sharing what some of the pilots have experienced. So those two 50% ratings, as I said, lead to a final rating of 100%. This is a matrix that represents how that final determination is made. Along the top it says teacher practice related indicators rating, so that would be 50%. And then along the side, student-related indicators, rating, that's the other 50%. So if I am rated proficient at the top for my 50% for the observation piece, but I'm rated exemplary for my student outcomes, if you look at where they meet in the middle, in the green, I would be rated as a final as exemplary. And so that's how the matrix is used. As I said earlier, this is a plan around accountability, but it's also a plan for professional growth and development of our certified staff. It's important that we provide them with opportunities for improvement and for remediation. So if a teacher is struggling with something, whether it be classroom management or differentiation or helping slow learners, helping slow readers, we want to make sure that the teachers have the skill sets that they can utilize in the classroom to help all students to learn. So it's our responsibility as a school district to make sure that we're providing those professional learning opportunities so that all teachers can be successful. We also want to make available any career development and growth opportunities for our teachers so that as they grow and learn, they have opportunities beyond what they're currently doing if they aspire to be something else within that career continuum. They might aspire to be a department head, an administrator, an assistant principal, a special ed director, whatever it might be. We want to make sure that we are providing for that as part of their growth, and that might actually get built into their plan. These are just some of the types of learning opportunities that can be made available for teachers. Targeted professional development. If we knew that in my district we might have 4 teachers that really were struggling with classroom management, we might do something very targeted specifically for those 4 teachers. We want to give them external learning opportunities to go visit maybe another school, another classroom, to see what does it look like when someone else tries to work with the same concept. Differentiated career pathways, coaching, assisting peers, leading PLCs, which stands for Professional Learning Communities, and leading data teams. Data teams have become a very important part of every school. So I want to talk just for a minute about the challenges, because I have the luxury of having the bird's eye view, being in a region where we have all kinds of school districts, and 2 of them are actually in the state pilot. So I would tell you from my perspective, the number one challenge that I'm hearing about and that I can see is around time. And to make it clear to you, I want to give you a very simple example. If I'm a principal of an elementary school that has 45 teachers, and I need approximately 7 hours to go through this whole process with every teacher, all those components, that equals 315 hours. And if you divide that by a 7.5-hour day, none of which many of our teachers or administrators do, they do many more hours than that, that's an additional 42 days of time that they must find in order to complete this process. So we've had some conversations about, boy, oh boy, how do you do that? And every district is struggling with this question of time. Some districts are looking at taking their high school department heads and making them administrators. They might have been in the teacher bargaining unit, and they're moving them into the administrator bargaining unit because they just need more people to be able to do these observations. Some districts are doing group goals with teachers at a whole grade level. Some school districts are looking at how can we do a group pre-conference so that I don't have to have a different pre-conference with every teacher who I'm observing. We'll do a group pre-conference. If I have teachers that are all teaching the same unit, we'll do a group pre-conference on that unit together, but my observations will be different in each of their classrooms, and my post-conference will be individualized. So they're looking at all different possible ways to save time to accommodate a very time-intensive process. 2 other challenges that I would observe, that I have observed, is that training time is critical. Teachers want to make sure they're doing the right thing. Administrators want to make sure that they are approving the right kinds of goals. Data teams want to make sure that they understand the kind of data that should be collected. parents want time with the teachers to understand what the whole process is. And right up front, just for the administrators, it's a 5 to 8 day commitment just to be trained in how to do this. And then those additional 42 days kick in after that. The data collection is a question. So how do we collect all this progress data from teachers? What form should it come in? Should we put it all in our data warehouse? Should we have a separate data system for it? How do we calculate all of these numbers? Is there a system that has all the algorithms built in so we could just plug in the information and it will tell us what that final rating is? These are the kinds of questions that have been coming up in the pilot. We have answers for some of them, but certainly not all of them. So those are my top 3 challenges as I'm working with all of our districts trying to plan for this new system. Now, David also reminded you that there is an administrator evaluation in place as well that very much mirrors this. I'm not going to go through it. I will show you this chart that shows you that all administrators have to participate also with a 50% outcome rating and a 50% practice rating. They have to be observed by their primary evaluators. There are student outcomes that they must meet, and it is a very aligned system from top to bottom. District goals are set. Administrators set their goals based on the district goals. They turn around and work with their teachers to align the school goals so that everyone is working in the same direction. It's a very aligned system and can work well, but it's just very time intensive. The last thing I will share with you is that the NEAG School of Education at UConn is responsible for the evaluation of the pilot this year. They've given their first data report, which was pretty much what I would have already told you. There's a need for training, there's a need for time, there's a need for clear expectations, there's a need for everyone to be on the same page, and so that there's fidelity within the process. Administrators can't opt out saying, well, good idea, we're not going to do that, we're going to do what we did last year. Everyone must be on board. Everyone must be consistent with the whole process. So as soon as we know what the next leg of the study is, my role is to make sure that my work in the districts includes anything and everything that we learn from the pilot districts. So with that, if you're not totally confused just yet, I would be more than happy to answer a few questions.
Any comments you want to make before we go to Q&A?
I'll do some at the end.
Okay.
Karen's going to turn the projector off so they don't have it in their eyes.
Yeah, let the board go first.
Ready? So now we open it up to questions for our presenter, Mr. Convertito.
Couple questions. Every teacher, excuse me, I'm sorry. Every teacher has to be evaluated every year and every administrator every year?
Correct.
Okay. Who are the 10 pilot districts?
Okay, you're going to test my memory. We're going to go Bridgeport, Norwalk, Bethany, Litchfield, New London, Waterford.
So Bethany?
Bethany,
That one, yeah, those are the ones that are near us.
right. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but I would be more than happy to get that information to you.
And what is the difference between an observation and a formal classroom observation?
With the proficient and exemplary teachers, the classroom observation means you come into my classroom and actually watch me teaching. An observation of practice might be that we sit together and you actually look at my lesson plans, my unit plans, how I'm actually analyzing the data from the tests that I give to impact how I'm actually going to teach the next day. So it's an observation of preparation for practice. and my professional responsibilities.
Okay, and one last question. Contractually, we have prep times and so forth, and for teachers, are these evaluations allowed to be done during that time, or we have to pull in teachers out of classrooms to do these?
I don't think there's any collective bargaining implications here. All the same rules apply under this system that are currently apply, but there's just going to be a lot more of it that will have to be done, and may not all be able to be done during the regularly scheduled times.
Okay. And what we just saw was the minimum state standard?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Carey?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. In your PowerPoint, you mentioned IAGDs. Am I correct to understand the teacher decides what their goal is?
Correct.
And earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that the teacher and administrator have to come to mutual agreement.
Correct.
What happens when they don't?
There is a dispute process for them. I mean, they can ask someone from the State Department to come and sit in. Our experience in the pilot has been that there hasn't been a dispute. The goal of the administrator is to make sure that the teacher's goals are both rigorous but attainable. And so that's the criteria that the administrators or primary evaluators use when they're sitting with the teacher to determine the goals. So if you're my administrator and I come in with a pretty weak goal, you can say, well, that's a good place to start, but I think we can do better than that with your students. And so you as my administrator would have a conversation about how much more rigorous should I be making that goal. Or I might come in with a goal that's way high, and you're a little concerned that I might not meet that goal, and you might say, you know what, take it down a notch. This is the first year for this evaluation. Let's make it comfortable, let's make it successful, but let's make it rigorous. And so we would have a dialogue around that. Within the pilot, we have not had anybody who's had to have the State Department come in to negotiate a goal conference.
Okay. And you mentioned mid-year is a chance to change goals?
Mm-hmm.
Can you help me understand what a situation would be if we have a quantitative goal for achievement for our students, and it would make sense to, let's say, lower that?
If I was a high school biology teacher, math teacher, doesn't matter, pick the subject area, and let's say I was in a bad car accident, and now I'm out of school for 8 weeks, and so now they have a long-term sub in there for 8 weeks, who may or may not know the students the way I did. I set that goal based on what I was prepared to teach, what I knew about my students, how I differentiate my curriculum, how I assess them formatively and summatively. I have my plan. You remove me from that classroom for 8 weeks between, let's say, October, November. Now I'm supposed to go into my mid-year conference with the same level of progress. There's a possibility that that hasn't happened. So depending upon, and let's say it's a half-year course, so depending upon where that progress is coming from, the opportunity exists for teachers to change that goal if necessary. In the same vein, let's say I set a goal and my students are doing way better than I had expected. I can increase that goal as well. So I wouldn't want you to just look at it from a deficit point of view, that I would reduce the goal. We have the opportunity to increase the goal as well.
So as a follow-up to that, you give us a fairly extraordinary situation in terms of an example, a teacher's absent for 8 weeks. My concern with this, and I guess what I'm trying to figure out, is if we have a normal circumstance where it's not happening and the students aren't achieving, I just want to make sure I'm not hearing that, oh, well, we can just lower our expectations midstream, versus the mid-year development meeting being an opportunity for us to make a plan to improve.
Yeah, I very much appreciate your question and the opportunity to clarify. It would be in a unique situation that we would actually change the goal. If you were my administrator and I had been teaching all along, and I came to that mid-year conference and the students were not progressing, we want to look at why. I might need some professional development. I might need some support. I might not change the goal. I might need to get better at what I'm doing to help the students learn better. That really is what most of the time the scenario would look like.
Okay. How much flexibility does this board have to adapt this?
Well, what I've shown you is the minimum that they must comply with. You have lots of opportunities to create what you want in terms of a plan that represents how you define good teaching in the district. But what you saw in front of you, every school district in Connecticut must have as a minimum.
And just two more questions with the chair's indulgence. You mentioned 7 hours per.
That's a guess.
Okay. I would imagine if we're making an individual goal for every teacher in the district and we have to negotiate it, that would take 7 hours.
5 goals per teacher, every
Right.
teacher,
So-
every year.
My question is if we, and this might be to the administration as much as to Dr. Titler or his team as much as our professional here, wouldn't it make more sense for us to approach this, or is this just a union issue, from the perspective that we have school improvement plans? I got to imagine that our 5th grades are all going to look the same if we have 4th, 5th grades in one school. I'm confused why we're approaching it this way. Is this just what the negotiation was to be able to have a teacher evaluation program in the state, or?
Well, the negotiation that led to this was among the major stakeholders across the state. You had the 2 major teachers' unions, you had the Superintendent's Association, the Principals Association, a whole variety of people at the table that crafted this elephant. And now we have to ride it. So it's really not within our purview to change any of the items that Esther talked about. But can you, as you roll this out over time, perhaps have some efficiencies where is it possible for, say, all 5th grade teachers to have a similar goal? Is that possible? Maybe that's something we could do to make it work a little better. But this is going to be incredibly labor intensive to do, and we really don't know how it's going to play out. The one flexibility that Esther didn't talk about relates only to next year. The state got a lot of feedback about this from people saying, oh my God, how am I going to do it? We can't hire more administrators. No one would put up with that. Can we have a year to figure this out? Can we have a year just to train people, just to listen to the training requirements? And so the state, in its infinite wisdom, is going to allow some flexibility for next year, but it still requires that the entire model be done from start to finish. They allow you to do it with less than 100% of your teachers. And if we want to do that, we have to have a committee. Our committee has to look at it. We need to bring that back to you for your approval and so forth. But starting in 14, 15, everybody does everything. So it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to pull off. And I really think that if we're going to try to do this well, remember, at the same time, we're trying to adapt to the Common Core, right? And we're trying to adapt to a brand-new set of assessments that are unbelievably more challenging than the ones we're doing right now, the SBAC assessments, Smarter Balanced Assessments. So we've got Smarter Balanced Assessments, Common Core, and this, all happening at once, that you're counting on your school leaders and system leaders to figure out. We'd love to be able to merge those so that there's some coherence around all these things. That's the holy grail here. Rather than seeing teacher evaluation as a separate item, SBAC as a separate item, data teams as a separate item, school, to try to merge them all. But you're on this track to have to do all this by September. It's very, very difficult. But our goal would be to try to merge all of that into a coherent framework. And when we've asked for additional time from the state to do that, they've been less than excited to hear that.
Did you say you had a second question?
I'm all set. Thank you very
I'm
much.
now off my soapbox.
And thank you for taking the time to explain this to us. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You should also know that every state is facing the same dilemma, so it's not just a Connecticut issue. It's,
Right.
it's coming down from the federal government in terms of teacher performance.
To pick up on Mr. Kerry's statement, and then Mrs. Iacono, and then Mr. Liu, you said 7 hours is a guess.
Yeah.
Is that based on the experience to date of the 10 pilot districts, or is that just a guess that came out of?
Well, it's a guess based on the work that that I have done with administrators to say, okay, we have this number of goals, I have to prep for the conference, I have to give feedback to the teacher, I have to do that 3 times, I have to make sure that I've looked at the data, I have to enter the data, I have to come up with a summative rating, I have to report that to my superintendent. So it's a guess, but it's a very realistic guess. It could be 2 hours beyond that, depending upon the administrator. It could be 2 hours less than that, just because they're out of time.
Mrs. Iacono?
I don't know where to start. But I think it's a good idea in theory. I just have absolutely no confidence that this is going to be pulled off well in such a short period of time. Can we get a copy of your slideshow? Is that
Sure.
possible?
Yeah. We'll put it up on the website, actually, for everybody.
Yeah,
All
Karen,
right.
Karen has it. It's on this computer.
There was a slide where you had talked about student growth and development. That was one of the things that teachers could do in terms of growth. What would an example of that be that they would seek out?
It might look like, so what's called the SLO, the Student Learning Outcome, is more general, and so it might say that my students are going to improve in their understanding of estimation. The indicator for measuring that under that would be very specific. It would say that 85% of my 5th graders will score X or above on our benchmark assessment administered in May of 2014. It would be that specific. We're trying to make, they're supposed to be quantifiable.
Okay. And then the decisions where you get to choose between like a whole school survey or a student survey, at what level are those made?
Those are district decisions. Our recommendation is that every district have a district committee for teacher evaluation, that they that on that committee should be representation from administrators, the bargaining units, teachers, possibly parents, and anyone else that they feel would be important to add to the decision-making process. There are lots of opportunities for district decisions here. There aren't a lot of opportunities to change what you saw on the slide, but adapting it is really the function of the district.
All right, so as a follow-up through the chair to Dr. Title, what's your plan then? Are you going to establish a district team? Do you have a district?
We already have it. I
Okay.
mean, we've been on this. We have 2 of them, because remember, the whole thing you saw about the teachers, just replay that for the administrators.
Right.
So we have a committee of teachers and administrators developing the plan for the teachers, and we have, as well as central office folks, and we have a team of administrators and central office folks developing the administrator evaluation system as well. I should also point out that, we have to submit this. We'll get feedback on it from the state. We might have to then, change it, but also, you implement it for a year, you have another opportunity to change it. So we've got to move lickety-split on this and get something into the state by April 15th.
And then who evaluates administrators? That just works down through the reporting order?
Right. So your associate or assistant superintendent would evaluate all the building principals, probably. Any building a principal that has an assistant principal, they would probably be responsible for that assistant principal. Anyone at the high school who's has an 092 and functioning within that administrative role as a department head could evaluate teachers. I'm sure that your committee has already looked at that.
Well, it's already
hierarchy.
set. I mean, that's not a change.
Right.
Actually, in the board's policy manual is a, what do we call that? Organizational chart that shows, who evaluates whom. So here, because we're a much bigger district, basically the way it works is that I evaluate all the central office administrators, so I will be doing this with all of the central office administrators, and then the different central office administrators have principals or curriculum leaders to evaluate as part of their job. So, as an example, Anna Kataya-Leonard is evaluating all of the elementary principals.
Now, let me also add that I've done a lot of research into what the state calls complementary evaluators, which are peer evaluators, and what is that looking like in different states. That's a conversation you would have to have with the bargaining unit so that you could be clear on what the expectations are. But there are some school districts that are utilizing highly trained teachers to do some of the observations and collect some of the data just because of the time commitment. I would tell you that the Denver Public Schools utilizes that system, and those complementary evaluators have to go through 30 days of training to be prepared to be observers. And it's a 2-year commitment. They're pulled out of the classroom, and they actually have a caseload of, say, 60 teachers throughout the year that they observe and support.
Okay.
So different states are trying to look at different models, and Connecticut has not gotten behind the complementary evaluator with a lot of specificity, other than we've set some basic guidelines around it, and they've asked me to do some research around other states and what's been happening. And I've submitted my guidance to the state, and it's before the commissioner now as a possible piece to share with districts as another alternative to help with this time piece.
Right. Just a couple more things. So specific to Fairfield, at the elementary school level, obviously you just have one principal, so then that principal would be responsible for evaluating all the teachers.
Correct.
And then when you get to the middle school, when you have an assistant principal, are they able to split
Yes.
that between the two?
Yes.
Okay, and then likewise up at the high school,
The house masters take the,
that they would
right.
farm that out between
Right.
however that works.
But her load number is about right. I mean, when she did the slide about approximately how many people do you have?
Right.
Because remember, the term teacher doesn't just refer to the classroom teacher.
Glad you pointed
We're
that
also
out.
talking about psychologists, social workers, guidance counselors, anybody who holds that teacher certification.
Reading
So,
specialists,
reading
literacy
specialists,
coaches, numeracy
language arts
coaches.
specialists, math specialists. So remember, you think of, okay, well, there's only 24 teachers in this school, so that principal has 24
Right.
people to evaluate. It's not 24 because there's a lot of other people that are considered teachers under this that they also have to evaluate.
Can we, as a board, can we see what your breakdown is, your ratios, teacher to administrator, what their load is going to look like as this comes down, so we get a sense of what the increase per administrator
Right.
is?
Sure.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Just a couple of comments. I'm just, like I said before, I'm just concerned about the intensity of this, and as you can imagine, with budget constraints throughout all different districts, Fairfield's not unique to it. You hear these calls, please cut administrators, please cut administrators. It's that, it happens everywhere. My big fear is that I don't see how in this year you could possibly even go there knowing that you're faced with this, and there's no realistic way to know what those loads are really going to be. Would you agree with that, or is there
I would
a
agree
formula to figure
100%.
out we only need 25 administrators and we're good after that? I'm
Well,
just throwing
the other
numbers out
reason I would agree with that is because of the superintendent's comments relative to a whole new curriculum framework coming in and a whole new testing system. To ask a building principal to shoulder all of this new work in a high-quality way on top of all of these evaluations with teachers who are going to be somewhat confused and now I'm being measured in a different way, that's a lot to ask. And if there was a way to hold off on cutting administrators for a few years, if I were on a board, that's what I might say, just because the next 2 years is going to be extremely important to make sure everyone's off on the right foot. We develop good habits, we have good processes in place, people are comfortable that we're headed in the right direction, and that we're not compromising on the quality of the education that we're providing the students. So I am concerned if there are districts that are looking at cutting administrators. And there are districts, as I said, that are trying to elevate some folks to an administrative role, in particular at the middle school, high school level,
Right.
to help shoulder these new initiatives.
I just have one last thing, and then is the state doing anything to communicate that district-wide so that the people that ultimately fund our budget, taxpayers and such forth, understand the initiative? What are you doing to communicate this to the state as a whole and everyone here that's involved, if anything at all? 'Cause that's been my big plea as we rodeo the budget. This is what's happening, and it's extremely difficult to cut an administrator.
My understanding is that individual school districts and taxpayers are contacting their own legislators, and that there are probably 8 or 9 different bills before the legislature now that range from everything to we should reduce the amount of writing that a primary evaluator has to do at the end of a year around a teacher's evaluation. There's one on we need to make all this data public. There's one on we need to have a whole year off. So there are 8 or 9 different bills that are coming from different directions and with different points of view. I don't really think they're going to go anywhere. This has been put into law so that the state of Connecticut was able to achieve the federal waiver for No Child Left Behind. So there's a lot of weight there.
How it all started.
And so as much as there might be small numbers of constituents that believe in some of these other bills, I think there's a pretty hefty decision that's already been made that's going to be hard to change. Again, just my opinion, but I respect your question, and I think that's where the commissioner is expecting people to see this for what it is and allowing communities to make their own decisions. It's very political, and I just don't think that the State Department's in a position to weigh in on that in this way. They've said, we got the waiver, this is part of it, you folks have to go forward.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank
Liu?
you.
You had questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Based on the pilot so far, in your opinion, how is it going?
It's a struggle because of the time. I have administrators emailing me saying, what will happen if I don't get to all my observations? Now, we're in a pilot year, so no one, to my knowledge, is going to be penalized for not being able to follow through because we're supposed to learn from this. UConn is in the schools. They are doing the surveys, et cetera. So I think the time factor, I think how we're going to collect the data, and again, the training piece. Teachers need to feel comfortable that they really understand the process. And whether in one district, we did a training of trainers so that each principal was well prepared to do a faculty meeting, so they were preparing their own staff. We just have to make sure everybody has a consistent view, a consistent process, and is supported as they proceed. The first year is not going to be easy. It's new learning for many of us, but it absolutely has been a challenge in the pilot districts.
So it's really too early to see if it's helping to identify where teachers need help or are
Right.
doing well.
Right, I would agree.
And my other question is for Dr. Teitel, in that if we have an April 15th deadline, where do we stand as a district in implementing this so far?
Well, we haven't implemented anything. Hey, we're working, looking at all the choices that we have to make around this, and crafting a draft that we can send to the state to get feedback on by April 15th. We wouldn't be actually implementing until September. But there's a lot of choices to be made. We also are waiting for some state guidance on some of these issues. For example, the state may provide us some surveys. If we want to do, say, a parent survey as part of this, the state may provide that, and we might not have to pay for that, or they might not, and that might enter into our, into what we have to do. So this is, like, every week things change on this. So we're in development mode right now. We will be ready to implement at the level required by the law for September. We will not shirk our legal responsibilities. And we have to make a decision about, do we want to take the state up on its offer to do a partial implementation? It could be that that's more trouble than it's worth. Having teachers on 2 sets of evaluation systems, just may not fly. So we're going to be scrambling. We've got good people working on it, but it's going to be a mad dash to the finish line, on top of everything else. So that's where we are with it. We're in development right now, Perry.
Mr. Fattabine and then Mr. Convertito.
Yeah, there are 4 rating areas, as I understand it.
Yes.
One of those rating areas is 5% for whole school student learning indicators or student feedback
Correct.
surveys, interviews, and so forth. Is your interpretation of that such that it could be divided up so that like 2.5% is whole school student learning and 2.5% is student feedback, or is it one or the other?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that districts have the option of doing one, the other, or both. I can get back to you on that, because that hasn't happened in the pilot districts I'm working with. So I would have to check with the State Department to see if anyone has opted for that and how have they calculated it.
Right,
So I would be
yeah, it's
more than
just-
happy to find that out.
And then along that would be, who would make the decision? Is that a board decision to go with either 5% of the whole district student learning indicators or 5% of the student feedback? Or who makes that decision?
Right now, my recommendation is a district decision. That's why they have a district team to make that decision. And then they make a recommendation to the board with their plan saying, this is the way it's come together. Here's our rationale for why we believe that this is the way to go. At the end of the year, we don't like it, we can always change it. But I've always put that in the hands of the district committees, evaluation committees.
Well, as I understand what you mean, is the district committee makes a recommendation to the board, but it's the board decision. Does it require a board decision as
It
part
does
of the
not
statute
require a board decision, no.
It's not.
to make that decision?
Right.
Which
It's
would-
not a board-approved
No.
document.
Correct.
All right,
The
so-
only thing the board has to do is if we decide
Right.
next year that we want to take the state up on its option to not do full implementation, then we have to bring that to the board to say,
Right.
here's the option we want to submit to the state. But the actual design of the plan
Right,
is not a board vote.
correct.
It would be a decision of a committee,
Correct.
Correct.
and the committee is appointed by superintendent, I understand, that, not
Correct.
the board.
Correct.
Correct.
All right. And I guess I also have a little confusion or not quite sure as to how how the rating is going to work. And let me see if I can give you an example, and maybe you can clarify it. There are 4 rating areas. Each of those 4 rating areas have 4 performance levels. There are exemplary, proficient, developing, and below standard. So if, as an example, I have someone who's being evaluated, and they happen to get an outcome rating of exemplary and a practice rating of below standard, what would be their overall rating?
Okay, I'm looking at the matrix, so tell me again.
Well,
It's,
in other words, the 50% is the outcome rating is 50% of the evaluation, and
Okay.
that comes in at exemplary.
yep,
And then you have the other 50% of the practice rating, which comes out at below standard.
correct.
Now, I don't understand, in theory, they're then end up somewhere between proficient and developing.
Correct.
But what do you give them? Proficient or developing? Because they're sort of in between. If you do this typically,
Right.
that's where there's no numerical.
So if I'm looking at the matrix,
Well,
if
don't
I
have the
understand.
matrix.
Well, no, but I'm just saying, to follow your line of thinking, you said that if the performance rating on the students was exemplary, right?
Right.
And my practice rating, which is based on the observations, was only developing right now.
Below standard. Everything's, in other words,
Below
practice
standard.
rating's below standard.
Okay. On the matrix, it says gather further information, because that would be so bizarre that they would really want to know,
Perfect
how could the
document.
kids do so incredibly well and the teacher be so bad? How could that happen? So it would
Things happen.
require an additional look into that rating.
Even more work.
But let me ask you a quick, where does that matrix come from? Is that matrix a state statutory?
It's from the state, yes,
Well, it's from the state. Is
Right.
that matrix part of the statutory
correct.
requirements?
We must use this matrix.
must use that matrix.
All districts will use this matrix.
Mr. Convertito.
I just had one observation on the administrative evaluations, and it's an observation, maybe you can give me some input. Having been a manager and so forth, I always wanted some bottom-up input, and it doesn't seem to me that anywhere in that administrative evaluation there's any place for teachers to evaluate administrators. Is that correct?
There's a part there for stakeholder feedback. I think it's 10%. And one of those stakeholders must be teachers. So there's an opportunity for teachers to give feedback to the administrator and be surveyed in the same way. It's about feedback and improvement. It's not an opportunity for them to actually evaluate the administrator, but they are required to give some kind of feedback to the administrator. And again, that can be done through focus groups or surveys. In Norwalk, we just finished a teacher feedback survey that we're utilizing as part of the pilot, and I'd be more than happy to share that as well.
Doesn't that seem somewhat incongruent if we're giving teachers essentially less feedback than we're giving parents and students? When we're giving parents and students, I see cumulative 15% of a rating on a teacher, but those stakeholders, again, only have a lesser percentage feedback when evaluating administrator?
The 10% stakeholder feedback has to be parents and teachers together. That comprises the 10%.
And which evaluation are you looking at?
The administrators, right?
Is that this chart right here?
Well, there's two charts here, right? There's
Right.
these two inside covers.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, if you read it one way, it's the administrators, and
Right.
read the other way, it's the teachers. It's
So
quite a
pink-
handy document that CES put together,
Pink,
actually.
pink,
So the
pink
administrator is pink,
is pink. So stakeholder feedback is 10%, of which
correct.
half of that would be teacher I assume some teacher input somehow, right?
Let's see. School-based administrator stakeholders must include teachers and parents and may also include other staff, community, and students. But it must include teachers and parent feedback as part of that 10%.
Now flip to the other one.
The teacher? Okay.
Peer or parent feedback is 10%, and then on the other half, on the outcome rating, whole student learning indicators, so there's a cumulative there of 15% for, right?
Don't try to understand the logic. This was a huge compromise.
All right, I'll leave it
And
there.
it's not debatable. So don't try to even parse it. It's not that sophisticated.
I'd like to suggest that we probably have other agenda items that we need to move on, but Mrs. Kennelly wants to have a comment or two at the most, right?
I have a few questions. First, welcome to my world. One question regarding the giving of the titles to the teachers at the end of all this. Right now, there's a huge time lapse between the taking of the standardized tests and the delivering of the scores. And Smart and Balanced, through the chair to Dr. Title, aren't they talking about that possibly in May?
Yeah, that will be done in the last 12 weeks of the school year, and those results will come back fairly immediately.
Oh, okay.
So with this lag problem is probably a 2-year transition. There is a provision that you can, and this is even more work, that if, when the test results come back in July, if those results would change a teacher's evaluation, then the administrator can go in and change it. So you actually have to complete the evaluation in June based on the data you have. But then when the test scores come back, you might have to reopen that and look at it again based on the standardized tests, right?
And actually change the final rating.
And change
of
the final
teacher.
rating. So you
Up
could
or
still be
down.
working on last year's evaluations in
Right.
September when you're supposed to be meeting with the teachers to plan their goals for next year.
Right.
Right.
Because,
You got it.
because again, because that's 22.5% of their rating, so that's
Right.
highly,
So you
Possibly
could think
likely.
that maybe we should put this part off until the smarter balance comes in to avoid this, but that would be not well received.
do you see that, and I don't know if you've seen this through the pilot programs or not, kind of piggybacking on Mr. Convertito's point about the administrators, they're producing their goals at the same time that the teachers are supposed to be producing their goals with an eye towards the teachers becoming better. Do you see, or is there something in place out of concern if an administrator has his or her concern and the teacher has something specific that he or she wants to focus on, that if it's not directly helping the administrator goal, that could be an issue? The case in point, you gave the example of estimation. I mean, that was a very specific goal. If the administrator had something, and again, it all should be about good teaching and getting good results. But since we're talking about measurable numbers, if the teacher's measurable goal numbers aren't directly contributing to improving the administrator goal numbers, do you see that being a conflict of interest?
No, because there are two goals that the teachers have to write around the student performance. So that first one, for tested subjects and tested grades, the administrator very much will want that to impact the whole school, what they call the the school performance index. But that second one is probably where they're going to have more opportunity to really discuss what should that second goal be.
Okay.
That's an excellent question.
Okay. Also, one thing that wasn't mentioned at all during this is the appeal process.
Right.
That at the end of all of this, after all of these supposedly final decisions have come down in June, and then the real final decision has come down in July and August, if the teacher disagrees with it, there's a whole nother round of time impact on administrators of how they're dealing with appeals. Is
Right.
that?
Every plan must have a dispute process outlined in it to demonstrate that if there is a disagreement, that there's actually a process to follow.
And then I just want to, last question, follow up. I'm sorry, I don't remember whose question it was. What exactly from this point forward now is going to have to come back to the board for approval? So what will we have to be seeing again to contemplate, and what is just we're sitting back and?
You only get something if we decide we want to do a less than full implementation for next year. That's it.
Right.
I just have one question. I promise
Mrs.
it's not-
Iacono, one question.
So, the board has, just to be clear, we have nothing to do with this process other than we ultimately determine the budget, and there might be budget implications that come forward here. So we have no say at the table, correct? And that's
Correct.
nobody's fault here, that's the way
That's
that
the way it works.
That's
Right.
just the way it's
Okay.
been
Right.
constructed.
And when this was all put together, the stakeholders all involved, was CABE involved? Were there?
Yes, Cabe was at the table.
Okay.
Everybody was there. That's why it took so long.
My only, we're stuck with this, and there's not a darn thing the 9 of us can do about it. I find that incredibly frustrating and quite frankly, wrong.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, so, I mean,
Oh, and that's why it's been in the news quite a bit.
Right.
I don't think folks really understood the implementation of it early enough on, and the implications for budget, the implications for time. It became part of this federal application for the waiver, and that was the focus. And at that time, it looked like a good idea. So I think there wasn't enough publicity, per se, around what all of, there are, I think, 93 components to the reform bill that was passed. 93, if I'm not mistaken. That was a huge bill that got voted through with many pieces to it. Many pieces to it.
When did
And
they vote on that?
That's a third.
when did they vote on it?
Yeah.
Last year, last spring, the end of
Can
the
I-
short
can I,
session.
Thank you.
Can I ask if we can, because we do have to move on to a couple of other topics,
Just one quick.
like a 7-word question?
You got it. What is gained by opting out of the No Child Left Behind and going this route?
That's not a 7-word answer.
Basically, the No Child Left Behind was a train wreck waiting to happen because of the escalating consequences that were going to happen as more and more schools were going to fail to make the very difficult bars that were set. And so eventually the state and districts will be overwhelmed with implementation, with all kinds of stuff happening to them, all kinds of bad publicity, all kinds of support they're supposed to be getting that they aren't getting. And it was basically, everyone agreed the law was broken, needed to be fixed. Congress could not reauthorize this bill. They've been trying to reauthorize this bill for 5 years. They can't get it reauthorized. That's when you would have made all these changes. So instead of reauthorizing it, the White House decided to basically grant waivers to states to extricate them from this train wreck. Okay? So rather than simply giving flexibility to this, they saw it as an opportunity to get the reform initiatives they wanted through this waiver process. So the federal government, for practically zero investment of dollars, was able to push a reform agenda to the states in order to get you out of the No Child Left Behind debacle that was about to unfold.
It just seems like a lesser of two evils issue.
It's actually the worst of two evils. But
now
I will
we're-
s- go
Now
ahead.
we're getting into subjective conversation.
Right,
So
right.
let me move on and ask if
Okay.
you have any objective
Right.
final comments that you'd like to make on the
I've
title.
gone off the wall on this, and actually, if you followed my blog, I've been writing about this for a while. This is not, brand new. I will say, though, that if we could do this well, this new teacher evaluation system and the new administrative evaluation system, if we could do this well, it would be a big improvement over the current practice. And I think it would have an impact on student learning and would be fairer and better for all concerned. However, doing it this quickly, without the resources to do it well, in a shrinking budget year, is just, very difficult. So I don't think philosophically we're necessarily opposed to it, but it's the implementation and the feasibility is really questionable, and that's what I plan to take on it.
And I think what that means is that this body and our parents and our students and our citizens ought to have patience with our central office staff, with our principals, with our teachers over the next 2 or 3 years, because there's a lot of work in front of them. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for allowing me to come, and I would say that Fairfield, as one of our school districts, has been at every table. They continue to be supportive. They continue to be well-informed. They're very participatory. Other districts look to Fairfield for guidance because they feel the people that are here in your central office are really smart people. And we value having them as partners in this process. Anything I can do to answer additional questions to the board, don't hesitate to contact me directly or contact me through Karen Parks. Thank you again.
Thank you. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. We have 3 minutes here to approve, and enclosure number 2 is the minutes of the special meeting of January 22nd, 2013. And the recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of January 22nd, 2013. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Iacona? Mr. Convertito seconds it. Any questions on those set of minutes? If not, all in favor, raise your hand. It is unanimous. Moving on to the second set of minutes, which is approval of the minutes of the special meeting of January 24th. And the recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the special meeting of January 24th, 2013. Do I have a motion? Mr. Carey? Mrs. Gerber? Any questions or comments on those set of minutes? If not, all in favor, raise your hand. Okay, they're all up, unanimous. And the third set of minutes, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 29th, 2013, and the recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of January 29th, 2013. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Iacono, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Any questions or comments on that set of minutes? If not, all in favor, say aye. Raise your hand, It's unanimous? Okay. Wow. 3 sets of minutes in 3 minutes. We're now on to student reports. And I should have reminded you that if you had a question on teacher evaluation, you could have easily asked it sitting here at the board. But who wants to go first?
We're both well represented.
Okay.
All right. Good evening, Board of Education and other guests. My name is Marco Congello, and this is Alice Rocha, and we're privileged to speak on behalf of Fairfield High School. Tonight, we'd like to share a couple current events and accomplishments of our community. As many of you guys have heard, on January 31st, a portion of our roof blew off during a windstorm. 10 classrooms sustained some water damage, and 15 classes were displaced for 3 days. Our school staff and community really came together and accomplished a lot in a very little amount of time, and we got the roof back and running up in a few days. Most students actually enjoyed the change of scenery and liked that some of their classes were temporarily moved to a new location. And our student body made sure that the progress was all documented on Twitter and Instagram. Additionally, CAP testing is beginning this Monday, March 4th, and we're looking forward to the extended periods of classroom time. In other news, advanced placement test registration is in the process of being distributed. I know I received my packet today, and every AP student in our school is waiting for May 20th, the last day of exams. And on the sports end of things, some accomplishments are that our winter sports season was phenomenally successful. Our wrestling team had 25 victories, which was the most in Ludlow's history, and 3 of our wrestlers advanced to the state open, and 1 of our sophomores advanced to New England's. Our female gymnastics team won 2nd in FCX and 3rd in states, and one gymnast, Perry Kindle, won the individual championship of FCX, which we're very proud of all of our teams, and we showed our support at many of their games and meets. And Alice would also like to share some news with you.
So despite the blizzard, February is a very busy month for travel at Fairfield Ludlow High School, and there's the Quebec trip, which a handful of Falcons went to participate in a school-offered trip to Quebec with the French program, and there that we all spoke, well, they all spoke French. I was able to participate actually my sophomore year with this trip, and I can say it's wonderful. We dog sled, eat a lot of maple syrup. We speak a lot of French, and it's really fun. And it's during the winter festival there. It's memories we'll never forget. And then there was also the AFS trip, where 35 students and 3 teachers in the AFS club, they worked together to sell citrus throughout the year to fund their trips to DC. And while we were home with the blizzard, they were off in DC helping clean elderly people's homes, organizing preschool for homeless children. They prepared meals also for homeless shelters, and all students, they loved being able to give back, and they look forward to the trip every year. There was also the B3 trip to Guyana, which is part of the Builders Beyond Borders program at our school. And 10 Ludlow students actually participated. They spent last week in Guyana helping the community and, more specifically, the schools there. The activities included things like building a bridge to make sure that students could actually get to their schools. They helped build a school, And the students worked actually from 8 to 4:30 p.m. every day, and they loved not only escaping the cold weather here, but bonding and living with the community there. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I know they'll all cherish that. We also held the college panel info session for junior parents and juniors, where we discussed the college process. I was actually one of the 3 students there discussing the process from my perspective. There were 3 mothers as well, and the mothers, one spoke about gap year programs, another one about applying if you have a talent in music and art, and also athletes and the differences in applying and getting the right college for you. It was great. It was a great resource for juniors and their parents, and a great time to ask questions, which we all have questions about the college application process. So it was just great preparation for the process. And thank you for having us tonight and your time.
We have questions for our students from Ludlow. Fairfield Ludlow. My wife would shoot me if I just said Ludlow. My wife was a chaperone on one of those winter carnival trips. The students at the time coaxed her into getting into a rubber tube and going down a snowy hill. And after a few turns and flips and a face plant in the snow, everybody held their breath, and she stood up and said, "Okay." Some student took a video of it, and for a few brief moments, she was famous on YouTube. Thank you for coming. Again, you're welcome to stay or take off. On the board committee liaison reports, I know that we have a brief comment about Riverfield in the Communications Committee. Is there anything else that needs to be brought before the board? If not, Riverfield?
I just want to highlight, I know you were sent the minutes, but I just want to stress again that the committee is not quite back to square one, but trying to rework the plan to get the costs down. So they've pretty much scrapped, I think, what was 4E or something, 4VE as a plan, which was a 2-story building. That also had to do something to do with soil compaction and that type of thing as well, but mainly they're trying to get down to a $13 million budget number, which is what they discussed at the waterfall. So I just want to continue to highlight that, even though you're getting it in writing. And I did mention last time they met with Dr. Title and spoke about ed specs and how things can be met and things like that. So at this time, it looks like they can try and fit everything in within our ed spec, but depending on what comes back at the next meeting, they may or may not at some point have to come back to us in terms of ed spec, but right now they're trying to work within our what we've put out.
Any questions on Riverfield? The Communications Committee.
Okay. Yeah, I had, everyone should have this handout here. It's 2/26/13 Ad Hoc Communications Committee update. So I just wanted to touch base and let everyone know what we've been up to. We've been meeting once a month, and on top of that, we've also been making the rounds to the assorted PTAs. And between SEPTA, PTA Council, and the 16 schools, there are 18, so we've split it up. Each of us are going to 6 organizations. And so far, they've been going really well. The one thing I'll say, universally, everyone's been really pleased that the Board of Ed is reaching out and, meeting with the PTAs. Once we've met with everyone, which I hope to finish up by March, we'll do a full report just to let everyone know, all of the feedback that we got. But for the time being, there were 2 things that have come up at a few different meetings that we were at. One revolved around public comment. There were a lot of different, questions, requests, suggestions in terms of should we have more public comment? Should it be located at a different place in the meeting? Should public comment take place for discussion items as well as voting items, that type of thing. So, obviously, that's something we can discuss later, but that is something that's come up quite a bit. One thing that I know that I brought up at the meetings that I was at, and that I always say anytime anyone discusses public comment, is that whether we keep it at 2 minutes, increase it to 3 or 5 or 10 or anything like that, there is also the opportunity for anyone in the public to contact the Board of Ed members through email, through phone calls, and really have a back and forth dialogue, because even if we extended public comment, we're still not going to have that dialogue going back and forth. So that's just something that I always try to stress with people, is that you can always contact the board. The other second point that's come up a number of times is just in terms of getting the information out to the public, particularly in regards to the minutes. I think some people, some PTAs felt that the minutes are just so large and unwieldy, it's hard to kind of pick different things out of it. And then also it takes some time for the minutes to be up for them to look at. So would there be some way to get things quicker and or more concise? So one thing that I did, and this is the, if you want to turn the page here, well, first here on the back side of the front page, here's just a list of all the PTAs that we're going to with the dates. And we had to reschedule a couple due to weather and illness issues, but again, we hope to finish that up by March. But then this third page here, where it says meeting minutes, this was something that at our last committee meeting we discussed, just trying to compress the more extended minutes and just purely put down the voting items, who voted, how they voted, any of the motions, something like that. So I just took the November 27th meeting and just basically did the notes that I take at meetings anyway. So this would be something perhaps we might want to consider doing. This could be posted online quite quickly so that people could see how the votes went, who voted on what, that type of thing. And then the more detailed minutes would come out at a later time to kind of fill in the blanks. So this is just one idea, just in terms of, people making comments and saying we'd like to get something quicker and something shorter. This could be that. So again, happy to hear any input from anyone on the board as to how they feel on that. Then if you turn the page, the next two here, one other thing that we had discussed, I think I brought it up the last time I talked to the board, was doing board member bios to post online. Other boards of ed do it just to, kind of make the board members more accessible, where you grew up, where you went to school, that type of thing. So both Mr. Dwyer and myself just wrote up two different times, one with kind of like bullet points, another one more kind of narrative, just to give a sense of what we were looking at and something that we thought we could possibly do online. Again, this is something the board can discuss at length, and I don't know if the majority feel that it's something that we'd like to do, but not everyone would want to post it. I don't know how we'd want to go down that road. So it's just an idea, just a better way to communicate who we are to the public. And so I think that's pretty much it. Did I cover everything, or I'm just trying to...
Are there any decisions you need tonight, or you're just looking for comments?
No,
or-
I don't think there were any really decisions per se. It was just kind of give an update since we haven't weighed in a couple of months. And again, we'll check back in again later. But if anyone has any other questions, anything that you feel you'd like to see us do, any things that you think...
Any questions or comments for Mrs. Gerber? Mrs. Cannelli?
One, I think, quick question. The whole point of this is communication, so in many ways, for some of these decisions, I would think the 9 of us would be the last people who should be making this call. I mean, it would be great that if getting the feedback from the public and all of your PTA conversations that the 3 of you are doing, and if you mold together, some of these ideas, a revised draft of the minutes or the idea of bios, wouldn't it make sense to then somehow send it out to the PTAs to say, what do you want? I mean, if the whole goal is to communicate better with the public, we might have our own idea, or I don't know, maybe the feedback you've gotten from the PTA is specific enough that you know what they're looking for, but just as an idea, I'm not saying I know how to do it, but as an idea.
Right. No, I mean, that's certainly one idea. I mean, I guess the impression I'd gotten going into this was that we were, going to the PTAs was one aspect of this, and to get the feedback from them and kind of take that feedback and use it, and then have the board, weigh in on how they feel, because since it is going to be representing the board, some board members might feel that, well, no, that doesn't really make sense, and that type of thing. So, I mean, I don't know if we would want to have the board, discuss and or vote on something and then, kind of show it to the PTAs, whether we'd want to get the PTA feedback first. I mean, I don't have incredibly strong
That's
feelings.
something we can talk about in committee.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Any other comments, Mrs. Iacono?
I would just say on that note is our audience isn't only just PTAs. So, I mean, there's other people that might be interested in our bios and our qualifications or what have you besides them. Do you want our feedback now, or you want us just to email it? I have no problem doing the bio or Legally, this is all we need to do for minutes either. I don't have an issue with that. I don't know if you want us to send us our commentary, or you're looking for it right now this evening.
Either way, I mean, I know that we've got still a lot to discuss, so, I mean, I'm happy to just get emails and then we could discuss it at the next committee meeting and kind of see where everything is, unless anyone feels like there's something that we need to do right this second, but.
No, and then if you decide to do the bios, I guess you'll just tell us when we need to get them to you.
Right, yeah. That's, yeah.
The Mission and Goals Advisory Committee has met once. We're meeting another time. We are collecting names of citizens who have been suggested to us by different community groups, so that advisory committee is moving along. Superintendent's report, update on the blizzard.
Right, I'm glad the Ludlow folks reminded me, we had the roof blow off, then the blizzard, all since the last time we met. Yeah, this is the year of natural disasters. I think I should, get honorary membership in the fire and police department this year. So where we stand now is, and we've posted this on the website, the last day of school is Wednesday, June 26th. That is where we stand right now. We still have the rest of March to go. So, and we also put this on the website, the Board of Ed decides on graduation date, but you can't do that till after April 1st. And so we'll have that on the agenda for you at the April board meeting, so we will know exactly how many days we've had, between now and then. In the event that we have more than 2 additional no school days, then we go back and start taking days out of the April, vacation. And I know that's not everybody's preference, but once we use up 5, there's no other place to go. We've not gotten any indication from anywhere that the state is going to entertain any kind of waiver of the 180-day requirement, but as things progress, if I get any indications on what the standards are for that, I'll bring it back to you and we can make a decision at that time. But that's just where we stand. I have to say, in both cases of the incredible roof situation at Ludlow and the subsequent blizzard and cleanup, the extraordinary cooperation between the school personnel and the town personnel was what made it possible to reopen Ludlow with only missing 1 day of school after the roof, and to open school as quickly as we did after the blizzard. We were the only school district that had more than 30 inches of snow that opened, having missed only 3 days. I mean, we really got hit, and really it was an incredible effort, really rivaling the effort of the hurricane in terms of the cooperation. We talk about town-school cooperation, and it sort of always comes up in budget time, but to see it on the ground happening, fire, police, public works, our personnel, Tom's staff, Sal, Dave Fryer, I mean, everybody pitching in, working unbelievable hours, so that we missed the minimum number of days. I just want to give them a public thank you from both our side and also the town side for their work on that. I mean, town, they loaned us equipment. I mean, normally, for example, we're able to plow out some of our own schools, some of the smaller schools. That's what we do. We couldn't do it. We had no equipment to do it. The town barely had equipment to do it. They had to bring in payloaders to do it. It was unbelievable. We can't have another year like this. It's not statistically possible. So that's where we stand on that. Any questions on that, or?
Just very quickly, what's happening with that Ludlow Day?
Well, the Ludlow Day is sort of in abeyance right now. Ludlow, technically, from the state's perspective, doesn't have to make up that day because they're over the 180, because we are on a 182, year. So we're holding on that right now. We're going to see what happens the rest of the year and see where we go with it. I would be, reluctant to make that up as a student day and have to run all the buses for essentially for a non-day. But the staff day, we very well may need to make up. They get paid. So we're still working that out.
Mr. Carey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo our superintendent's thoughts. And Dr. Title, when we brought you here, I think it was about 2 years ago now, we didn't tell you about the locusts or the raining frogs either, so. 'Cause that's about the only thing that hasn't happened since you've arrived, so hopefully we're going to move in a new direction now. We've had a lot of discussion in the last few weeks around the budget, around administrative staff, central office staff, if they touch students or not. I think we've got some very good examples of staff impacting students in learning who otherwise might be in a role that isn't directly related to supervising teachers. Getting that school open after the roof blew off and getting our schools open faster than most of our neighbors impacts student learning and the cohesiveness of education in this town. So we have an extraordinary team that I'd like to commend, and I see some of them here, Mr. Cullen, Mr. Morbido, I know Principal Hatz is there. But we've had custodians feeding people in the shelter this year. We've had our custodial staff that was helping clean the fire department and the police department when we had a hurricane disaster. And I know we have a team that had sore backs after trying to shovel all that snow to clear the schools. So thank you very much for all your efforts. You do impact the learning of our students in the community, and this board member recognizes that. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Kerry expresses the goodwill of all of our board members in that regard. Any other questions on the Blizzard and school calendar? If not, enclosure number 5 is the review of the capital projects waterfall. So if you put that in front of you and...
Right. I'll just go through this just quickly because it feeds in nicely to the Ludlow Ed Specs discussion, sort of a segue here. So we attended the Capital Projects Summit. And in preparation for that, the town asked us to take our long-range facilities plan, slot our future projects into years that we thought were logical. But in addition to that, to put a cash flow projection on that. So what you see in front of you, the top set of bars or chart, are all the projects in the year in which we would anticipate authorization under the current long-range facilities plan. And then below shows the, for each of those projects, it may have a multi-year phase-in. And so the town's trying to get a handle of what their cash requirements would be, what their bonding requirements would be in any given year. So for example, and it's all color-coded. This is all Lisa Moscato's brilliance in the business office, I want to point out, along with Doreen and Tom. But so a project on here may have a number that represents the total costs authorized at the time, but then it spreads itself out. So just as an example of a live one we have going right now, if you look under your 1213 column at the top, at the bottom of that one you see Fairfield Ward High School roof. $6,351,000. It's in red. As you know, that's a multi-year project. It's at a building committee. It was bid as a multi-year project. So down below that, in the next, where it says waterfall schedule, in 1213 it shows $1,587,750. And then if you follow that red across, you'll see that that same number recurs over the 4 years. So this shows the town that even though $6,351,000 is the, say, bid price for the Ward roof, the town doesn't need to come up with $6,351,000 in that year. And so that way, they could take this information and piece it together with the town's information. The town did a similar exercise. And then they put it all together, gave it to their bond advisors, and they developed the famous waterfall chart, which estimates the town's debt and also its debt payments annually going out for the next 20 years or so. And that's what was reviewed at the Capital Projects Summit. We also wanted to get some feedback on this from the boards because we are going to present to you a revised long-range capital plan because we slotted these projects in places, but they were in the plan, but a year hadn't been assigned to them. We wanted to make sure these were roughly in the ballpark in terms of the town's overall debt. And it turns out this doesn't cause any big spikes there, and so we can pretty much put our plan together for your consideration using this layout. But of course, you're going to be able to swap this and make changes to it as long as the numbers stay roughly the same place. So again, it was to some extent a planning exercise, but it was also a little bit of a trial balloon to see what this would do to the town's debt service over time. And I don't have the town, we can get this for you, but they passed out that so-called waterfall that showed the debt service for the next 20 years based on the projection. So that's what this is. The Ludlow project is in several places, and the discussion point we had there was, you know, do you want us to bring the whole thing forward for authorization, knowing that the work is going to be spread out over multiple years, or do you want us to come in small bites? And I raised that question, we got sort of a, well, we're open to discussion about that kind of a thing. So that's, anyway, that's what this is. Is that enough? Okay.
So two comments.
Yeah.
I told Mr. Cullen that he should put a big red circle around the date of the Board of Finance waterfall discussion. Not only did he get complimented on the capital projects book and the format that we had put it in and that it ought to be adopted by the town, but the format that he has for our waterfall chart, they asked for a copy of it so that they could use that for the town's waterfall chart, and so he was complimented on that as well. So that was a red letter day for Mr. Cullen. The numbers that Dr. Title is referring to about swapping is the cash flow numbers. We can swap projects between years, but we do have to pay attention to how much money is spent in any given year, because that feeds into the town's projection as well. So those are the numbers that we'll have to be paying attention to as we talk about what our priorities are and what our projects are. Are there any questions for Dr. Title or comments on the waterfall chart? Mr. Carey.
Just to make sure I understand what you're saying and to frame this properly, so as we enter this discussion about conceptual study at Fairfield Little High School, if we exceed the 2013-14 number of $8,961,700,000 plus the trailing roof projects, we have to take something else out. Is that a fair way to frame the conversation?
Is that a question for Dr. Title?
For you, well, you were, you know.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, yeah.
Okay.
I think that if, and now we did update this to the most recent figure, so you'll see Riverfield's in here for 13, not the 11 that was there before, and the Ward Roof's in for its real number, not the number we were carrying. But this document is a living document. It's going to change as these projects come in. Osborne Hill, the real number's in there. But I think, as the board looks at this going forward, you do have to look at it in terms of trade-offs. I think this is pretty much the limit of what we're going to be able to maneuver at best. And again, all the discussion around this, everyone was very clear, just because we're saying, you don't have to make wholesale changes to it, doesn't mean anybody's implying that any of this is sort of pre-approved. We have to, every one of these projects has to go through the whole process.
Sure.
But I think your basic point is right. If we want to put something more expensive in a given year, we need to move something out of there.
Okay.
And
Yes.
not necessarily on a dollar for dollar, but close enough, that
I understand, and that's been the understanding in the past as the capital planning process began. I just wanted to make sure that that's where we still are. The other question I had, just relating to that meeting, is I haven't captured it yet on the computer, but was there any feel for wanting to move some of this up because of the environment for bonding, cost of money, things like that, or were they happy with the buckets as you have them displayed here?
No, there was no sentiment to move anything up.
From finance?
No.
That's their discretion.
No, I think that, when they looked at the way the bonding, the debt service came out, there's an increase for next year that we're all too well aware of, but then it levels out and actually at some point declines. But there still was no general statement of, well, gee, move this project back, financing is good, you'll have less inflation. I think it would have been too difficult to service the debt.
All right, thank
Because
you.
they're also looking at the overall debt load, making sure that stays within 10% of the total operating budget.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to Ludlow? Mrs. Connelly?
For clarification, the non-recurring projects 1 year, I'm not sure where that comes from, so therefore I don't know where those estimates come from.
The capital non-recurring projects are in here. They came from the long-range facilities plan, but in the previous iterations of the waterfall, going back to even the Ken Flato era, they had estimated capital non-recurring at a fixed dollar amount every year without identifying specific projects. So we used to carry a number of $2 million a year in sort of, that's kind of what we could ask for. But rather than do that, we actually went in and put in actual projects that are in there and estimated costs that we've come up with. And actually, that's a place where it actually helps. It saves money because in no year do these add up to $2 million. So that actually worked out for everyone's benefit to do it that way. But it used to be just a placeholder, and now there's actual projects in there.
So those are from the current long-range facilities plan?
Exactly. Right.
Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll move on to the Fairfield Ludlow High School educational specifications. Mr. Bill Silver is here, not to make a presentation, but to answer any questions that board members may have on the report that he issued, and also put in front of you, in case you didn't bring it with you, were the ed specs that were part of the January 9th packet that are the current status of the ed specs. So let me, so that we can at least put the motion on the table and then have discussion, say that the recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the Fairfield Ludlow High School educational specifications. Do I have a motion? Mr. Carey. Mrs. Gerber. Moved and seconded. And now for discussion. Why don't we start with if there are any questions on Mr. Silver's report, as people, I'm sure, read through it. Mr. Carey.
So I think I know the answer to this question, unfortunately. I have a couple, but the first one is, and I think Mrs. Gerber brought this up in a previous meeting, if we separated the actual air conditioning units from the HVAC system, how much do we take off of that $8.6 million? To frame the question a little better, we've got some air problems in the third floor of that building, as I understand it, and my question is there a way we can improve that without spending $9 million?
I'm Bill Silver with Silver Petroselli and Associates Architects and Engineers. Yes, there are always ways to do it less intense than fully air conditioning the building. Yes, we have air conditioned just single floors, in this case the upper floor, which is getting most of the heat load from solar gain. We weren't asked to dissect the dollars. It was more the approach. The question was how much to air condition the rest of the school, since 35% is already air conditioned. If I had to guess, comparable other high schools where we've air conditioned only the upper level, 1,000-student high schools are probably in the range of $2.5 million.
Okay. And how about, air conditioning is going to be a sensitive thing with our town bodies. How about better airflow? It's the same HVAC system, so the bulk of the cost is putting the tin in, or is it going to be?
No, you do have to add capacity, power to those fans and those units and ducted systems. You cannot just feed it, let's say, the old way that we did in the 50s and 60s by circulating through the corridors and hoping the classroom saw the benefit of it. So it is a significant cost in above ceiling renovations.
You're moving everything up, okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. Too bad. You make, yeah, no, I was pretty sure I knew the answer to that.
Mr. Carey,
but
if I could just ask a corollary.
Sure.
Did the original base ed specs include renovations to the existing HVAC system? And the air conditioning number that you quoted is in addition to that, or is that number including the base HVAC?
The ed specs did not include any ventilation improvements.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Okay. In terms of the ADA toilet room code upgrades, are these mandatory or optional? Once we crack the envelope of the building.
Yeah, I'm trying to find, where are you looking?
Somewhere between section 9 and 10, but I'm just looking at the different options for alterations. I read it somewhere sooner. Let's see here.
No, the ADA improvements are not mandatory. It's federal law, it is not state statute, and therefore your primary risk is only in terms of individual lawsuits or claims.
So my question to the chair as a follow-up to our team or to our architect, if he has the answer, is do we already have ADA compliant bathrooms in some parts of the school?
Right.
Yes, in some parts of the
Have some.
school you do.
Right.
We are proposing to modernize 7 of the larger toilets as part of this project, as one of those options that you saw in the many options.
But we do have accessibility for our students and
Yes.
staff
Yes, you do.
available.
The student lavatory is really a renovation of deteriorating lavatories.
But my only other question might be for our staff, Mr. Chair, so I can hold it or I can give it to you now, but basically, my understanding is this survey was done prior to the roof blowing off our building. I could be wrong about that, so I would like to get a feel for what the evaluation of the remainder of the roof is now that we've had that situation. I'm assuming our team has done an evaluation on the rest of the roof, and does that create some level of urgency for us to move that portion of the project out of where it is in the waterfall to here, based on the fact that we've had an incident?
I'm not qualified to address that. Tom or Sal, do you want to?
Urgency.
Mr. Carey has asked you to predict Mother Nature.
Right. Or the range of the roof.
I'll clarify.
Yeah.
Hi, Sal Morbido. The roofs that are up for replacement had their warranties expire in 2006, so we're just buying time. Could I predict that we're going to blow off another roof? No, I can't. But the roofs are aging and becoming problematic. We did put some money into rework on that roof, I want to say about 5 years ago. So we're seeing the end of the life of those improvements, and it's the roof failure that we saw is just showing that it's becoming more
Well, let me ask a question.
eminent.
Let me ask a question another way, maybe I'm not communicating my thoughts clearly. We had a roof blow off our building. I'm assuming we had engineers check the remainder of the roof?
The roofing,
The roof that didn't blow off?
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
And
The
what
roofs that
was-
didn't come off were
What
walked.
was their evaluation? Do they think that it can withstand a couple more years, or are they concerned that we have to do something now?
Not an immediate replacement right now. Oh my God, all the other roofs are going to fail
Right.
the next windstorm. But it is aging and coming up to end of life. We've extended the life by the work we did about 5 years ago, and it's becoming quite, on a 15-year warranty, we're in our 22nd year.
Can I ask you a question?
So we're getting good value out of the dollar that we put in on the original roofs, and they're just getting old.
Mrs. Arcona has a follow-up on
Can
that.
I ask that in a different way? If we had to go through now and rank these, and we couldn't do a particular project next year, could only pick one or the other, the sense of urgency that's coming through, do we need to be doing these roofs, the roof before we do the windows? Do we need to be doing the roof before we do the toilets?
I'll let the architects answer that one.
I mean, in all honesty, we don't have, if we don't have an unlimited, if I'm a homeowner and I have to do this stuff, but I've got to do the most, what is it that I've got to do?
Yes, weatherproofing is always a higher priority, even though you'd like to make education and a pleasant environment for the students a better one with the restrooms. But weatherproofing, the insidious water that is all around us is your highest priority, and so of those three that you mentioned, without a doubt, the roof is. You can get better insulative value. You will get your roof warranted for the next 20 years, where you don't have to spend more money on it like you will for the next 2 or 3 years while you prolong the IAGD. So, roof.
I will
Before
say,
windows.
Pam, there's the educational need for expanding that school is urgent.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I
Okay.
didn't mean to discount that.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
I
that-
took as that was not a
Right.
non-negotiable. But
These
if I-
windows have been falling apart and been attempted to be replaced for a number, long time.
Right.
So I guess I would say that if you wanted to knock something out of the project, I would knock the student lavatories out of the project. And while I don't know, your predilection for going forward in terms of, how much you want to ask for, I think the rest of them need to stay there. It's just a question of what we think the appetite is at the town level to do an authorization all at once, or whether they want to have it come in pieces.
Right.
I think it all needs to be done.
But even push comes to shove, I'm hearing that the roof would be even more urgent than the windows. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Carey, did we interrupt you in the middle of questions, or?
No, you've actually answered all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Kennelly?
Coming back to the waterfall, since this is what's gone to the other town bodies, and my sense was, I don't know if it was in response to Mr. Carey's question, but if we add something to this, that we have to take something away, does that mean as we look at the 2013, 2014 budget, that we need to start saying, well, Sherman isn't going to get their renovation, because according to this waterfall, it's almost $4 million in roofing costs, unlike the memo we received from Mr. Dwyer. I mean, you've got the minor roof indicated in 14-15, and then for 15-16 and 16-17, it's an additional 3.6. So if that comes back to the 2013, 2014, I mean, I don't even see exactly bathrooms as the issue here. You've got renovate and upgrade, or is the upgrade the bathroom there? So we'd be cutting that out and
be cutting that
hoping that
back.
adds up to $4 million?
Right. Well, also remember, just because it's authorized there, the roof is going to take probably 2 years to do.
Spread over 2 years.
Okay, so some of this is still going to spread out.
Okay.
And the Sherman situation is such that I'm not convinced that that's going to be ready for prime time in 13-14. It might be. I mean, we don't know. That's got to restart, essentially, that they finished that phase. So that may kind of take care of itself. So I think that remember, there was a long lead time on windows. There's a long lead time on a roof because you can't do it all at once. So to some extent, this is going to naturally spread out, and we can rework that. At this point, I think we're kind of looking for some direction as to what to take to the Board of Selectmen for their consideration, so that we can, at least get the ball rolling here.
Is it fair to say that the air conditioning / HVAC number is not part of the current waterfall chart?
That's correct.
And so therefore, if we want to add it, then Mr. Cullen has a substantial amount of maneuvering to do to try and get it to fit in. Is that a fair statement? It's not clear what projects would have to get moved, but if we felt that was a priority in some fashion and some dollar amount, then that'll create some change just at the very beginning. Any other questions or comments on the Ludlow specs that Mr. Silver can be helpful to us? Mr. Convertito? Oh, okay, of a general nature. Mrs. Iacono?
All right, so the things that I'm hearing about the air quality in the school, I guess you didn't really look at that then, you just gave us an air conditioning number.
That's correct. Air quality was not on the original priority lists in the facilities plan.
I guess then my question is for Mr. Cullen, through the chair, if that's okay. Do we have an do we have an air quality issue at Ludlow? Sorry.
Is the principal here? I don't
Right,
want to
whoever
say
you
something he
wanna punt to.
disagrees with. I do want to clarify that the renovation and addition for the enrollment issue would have mechanical means of fresh air and air conditioning. That'd be a requirement because it's a new addition onto the building. So that is in the number I estimated on the waterfall, and I'm assuming it's in the architect's number for his renovation and addition.
For the new spaces?
Correct. New spaces, it'd be required. As far as the air quality in the school building, we have had some issues, mainly with a lot of the guidance suites that were internal to certain areas. The last architect, Perkins Eastman, did their best with their engineers to try and get some supplemental air to those areas around the school, but that's been an issue. When the addition was finished last time, there were a lot of magnet hold-back doors that were used to segregate sections of the building per the fire codes. And the school administration wanted to make some changes, but we had trouble with that because those were put in places where there was air conditioning. The other areas that didn't have air conditioning, we couldn't just automatically leave all those doors open, or the temperature would never be met. So we've had some issues, but I don't believe we've had a lot of complaints from students, a few of the staff in the guidance suite areas, but principals here and maybe can speak to it some more. But,
Well, yeah, when I'm hearing that there's air quality issues at Ludlow High School, what does that mean?
temperature control.
Right.
It's hot, very hot.
Hi, everybody. As you know, the means of assessment that we use is through the Tools for Schools protocol, and we have not done one, a survey this year as of yet. Actually, that was in the works to do in January and February, but we had a few distractions with that. But actually, I've been in communication with our PTA liaison for Tools for Schools, and we just have, we wanted to use a new online survey tool as opposed to doing it by paper and pencil. So we're actually, by the time the board meets, we may actually have some updated information from Tools for Schools. But in reviewing some of the past reports that were done, the number one complaint really revolved around thermal comfort. That's the category that they use in Tools for Schools. So, and where that comes from is, as you know, we have a very large portion of our building that has a southern exposure, and it's all windows. It's that back part of the building that faces the football field and the student parking lot and tennis courts. So that with the sun beating down in those rooms, especially, again, as it was mentioned earlier in the second floor, from basically the first 6 weeks of the school year to now probably the last 8 weeks of the school year, there are some days that it's pretty difficult to run a classroom with the level of heat that the students and the staff experience. So they make do. They, we try to provide fans and, maintain fire codes and all that. But they open windows, but on some of the humid, stale days, it's really difficult to have a proper airflow, to just have a breeze in those rooms. So thermal comfort was the thing.
So what I'm hearing is it's hot in the second floor and
Yeah.
there's some airflow issues in the guidance
I
suites.
think with the new windows, if we can get the new windows, they'll have a film on them to help with some of the solar issues and that sun. We've seen that improvement at Holland Hill and some other schools that were getting very hot from the afternoon sun. So that could help also.
That helped at Riverfield, I know.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Follow up to
Mr. Terry.
Mrs. Iacono's question, just if at the time we take the roof off, is it more optimal to do this type of ductwork for the ventilation, or is that really irrelevant? You have better access to the plenum, anything like that?
It's, It's significantly irrelevant.
Okay.
There is some benefit.
That's a good one. I've heard that one. Significantly irrelevant.
Yeah. It's not purely irrelevant, but it's just that, yes, you will be doing some destructive cutting if you come in later on to drop in air handlers, but it's not prohibitive and it's not wasting much of the money.
Other questions or comments on the Ludlow ed specs? Mrs. Connelly.
Just one question for Mr. Silver. As part of your examination, was a no-build directive at any point part of this in terms of space assessment, or was it strictly you need to build this and therefore as the architects that's what you're doing? I mean, in terms of reconfiguring current space to get what was needed, as opposed to pushing walls out. Was that any part of this, so that's already been looked at?
We architects feel we have a charge to look at all facilities efficiently, and so we do not take just the word that you need to build and we need 6,000 or 7,000 square feet. We looked at the efficiency of how the spaces were currently used and scheduled, and we have that analysis in the report as well. So we did consider a no-build, but especially in spaces like the cafeteria and the density of not only the current student population, but the projected student population, that's why we came up with the relatively efficient spaces that we are recommending.
Okay, if I could refer the board to page 3 of the ed specs. And if we pass the ed specs as they are currently written in front of you with the motion that's on the table, they would include the windows, the lavatories, and the roofing, and of course the main addition that is needed. It does not include the air conditioning. So if you want to add the air conditioning or some treatment to the HVAC system, then the ed specs would have to be revised to do so. If you wanted to send in an ed spec that had less of a financial impact and therefore wanted to take out, I won't say the roof because it's pretty convincing that we have to pay attention to that, take out the student lavatories or the windows, then you'd have to make an amendment to the ed spec to accomplish that. So that I want to clarify what we have to do tonight in terms of what decisions we can make. Mr. Carey.
Mr. Chair, can you please direct us to the estimate that matches the ed specs in terms of dollars? There's several different prices in here.
You mean within the booklet?
Within section 9 of the booklet after page 18, I've got a
Mr. Silver, you put that
23, an
page
8 million, a 9 million.
9.
Yep.
And right after page 18, there is the, are you at page 18 and then turn the next page?
Huh.
Right, is everybody there?
After the plans on, okay.
I just have a page that says page 18. And then
Okay.
after it, some unnumbered pages.
Okay.
That then the project schedule is there. And there is a total budget number, and then there are other alternative budgets that have things in and out. So, Mr. Silver, perhaps you could answer Mr. Carey's question as to where he can match up numbers per the cost of a project based on these pages.
With the ed spec. So going on page 3 on the ed spec, the addition of the 2 science classrooms is the third line item down of 780,000. Now, on some of the pages, it's so if you're going to the first estimate page that we have in the book, that is 780. The 4 general purpose classrooms would be the 4th line item down of 3,400 square feet, or 935,000. The expansion of the kitchen and cafeteria is a combination of the first line item of 1,820,000, the second line item of 196,000 for the kitchen, and the third line item of abatement in the cafeteria of 48,000. The relocation of the teacher's lounge, I think that is part of the cafeteria expansion and alterations. The senior lounge is the same. It's buried in that 1,820,000, and these spaces are so commingled, it's hard to separate them. The windows is a standalone numbers, I should say. Of the second block of numbers, it's the 1,000,008. It's the 275,000 for the doors and hardware, and it is the abatement of those windows for 750. The student lavatories is in the third groupings of numbers of the 1,125,000 and the 50,000. The lockers are up in the top group of the most affordable $30,000. And then, of course, the roofing is down at the bottom of 2,640,000.
And to clarify, those are the construction numbers. There is a allocation of soft costs and FF&E that would have to be made in some fashion.
They adjust as you adjust, yes. And it's generally 20 to 25% of whatever your gross construction number is. Just make sure you add the 20 to 25%.
So if I were interested in doing the addition, cafeteria alteration, windows, and roof replacement, and not the toilets and the air conditioning, I sum that number and add 25% for contingency?
Actually,
Is that really, how are we going to come up with the final number here?
Well, that might be page 3 of those estimates.
3? That's easier.
And the top title says Windows, Additions, and Roof.
Excellent.
And it lists those 3 major blocks that you just mentioned. It does not include the air conditioning and does not include the toilets. So your gross number is at the bottom.
That's the 9886?
It's 11,630.
11,630,700. Your option is
Yeah.
the last page.
11.
We asked them to do a, like, menu of options, right? So if you want to do windows, additions, and roof, then you'd be looking at the 11,630,700 number. Again, spread out over a number of years, but that would be the authorizing number.
Correct.
Okay. The prior page is windows, additions, and bathrooms. The page before that is windows and additions. We started with this as windows and additions as being the upfront, this is what we got to get done. And that's the 8,462,700 number. All right? So if you want to add the roof to it, it takes it from 8,462,700 to 11,630,700. That's the delta.
And I apologize, Jeff. There's one more minor question that I just want to clarify. All these estimates, Mr. Silver, are showing PCB abatement windows for $750,000, and the total abatement from Fuss O'Neill was, I believe, an estimate of $937,000. Can you tell me why there's a delta there between those two? Am I missing something?
Sure. Because Fuss O'Neill also included the soft costs in that 937. Fuss O'Neill also has a separate breakout number for cafeteria and toilet rooms that makes up that 937. So the cafeteria abatement number is in that top batch of numbers that's part of that 937. The Windows has its own abatement number, and then all the soft cost
The rest is made up in your contingency on
are
the
down
bottom.
the soft costs, yes.
I got you.
So
Okay.
it's spread out
No,
throughout the
that makes
estimate.
sense.
But it's all in there.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mrs.
thank you.
Iacone- oh, Did you have a, no,
you
Mrs.
sure?
Iacone.
I'm not sure who can answer this question, but can someone just, we're in the ed spec where it says relocation enhancement of the senior lounge, including the creation of individual and group study areas. The creation of the individual and group study areas, are those just for seniors?
Greg, can you take that? Just trying to reconfigure existing space.
Currently, both Fairfield Ward High School and Fairfield Ludlow High School have a designated area for seniors as you might call a senior privilege, an area for them to be, because it is, part of our policy that if you're a senior or a junior, actually, that has a free period during the day, that, you're not assigned a study hall as the freshmen and sophomores are. So it's a place for them, to congregate, to study, whatever it might be. In your question, one of the things that we talked to the architect about is because of the, basically the overcrowding that we have now, we had to implement some restrictive policies on student access to the library. Some students were using it as a place to hang out as opposed to a place to study. So, we basically asked them for passes from teachers to just verify that they're there for studying purposes. But we have a lot of pushback from the students that there's no place for them to go. During lunch periods, if you want to study, the cafeteria really isn't a viable option for you because of the noise level and whatnot. If you're not assigned to lunch and you have a free period, you could go to the cafeteria, but if you wanted to study, you couldn't do it. So one of the things that we were talking about, my predecessor had put benches in the hallway as another place to for students to access. That originally posed some supervisory issues, and we've kind of, worked on that, and we're okay with that now. But we were looking for a way to provide a place for students to go, a place where they can, that it'll be appealing to them, something that, where they could get studying done, and as opposed to just, finding other places in the building, whether it's in a, sitting on top of a stairwell or, congregating in places where they shouldn't be. This would be a place for them to be, to have that access. So kind of like the idea of a student commons.
So if I'm understanding this, the library's too overcrowded to go if you have a free period if you want to study.
There's a protocol in place where they have to get a pass to do that.
Okay.
If you've ever been in our library, during the day, what you'll see is just about every seat taken up. Many students are studying, but if you're a student with a free period and you just need time to decompress after you've taken your 3 AP classes, or you need to do some research or whatever it might be, just do some reading, catch up on homework, it's really tough for them to find a place to be to do that.
Because it's too overcrowded in the library to do that.
That's right.
But when you say they're looking for something to do, to socialize, I mean, help me follow the process of why I'm creating more space. Is it because everybody can't study in the library?
It's to do the things that high school students do. They might be planning an activity if they're in a club and they need to do some organization. It might be to, register for their AP classes. It could be a variety of things that, that they need to do. And, while, we're always pushing the kids to take as rigorous a schedule as they can, oftentimes they do have free periods because it's a PE meets 2 days a week, and a lab is another 2 days a week for an honors class. There'll be a period of that, in the week that they'll have a free period. So that's usually when they're catching up on doing all the things that they're involved in. And
Okay, and there's not enough room to do that in the library?
right now, no, there's not.
Okay, so these new spaces that you'll be creating will give them a place to go because they can't fit in the library?
Yeah, and some of it really is, depending on how the architect draws it up, a repurposing of current space, not so much, new space. Right now, if you've been in our cafeteria, you know that there's a segment at the end where, there's some couches there, a couple of beat-up couches with rips in them and whatnot, and that's really all they have right now for other than the senior lounge itself.
And students, will freshmen and sophomores be able to access the new study areas? Will a portion of that be just a senior lounge?
We'd have to take a look at our policies, because right now freshmen and sophomores only are assigned study hall so that, they can do that. But it might be a place that, classes could use, for maybe a common space if they were doing some kind of, acting or, putting on a play or something. It could be used in a variety of ways. Could be a place where our school store is, that students would access, to buy their spiritware or whatever. So, it's really a multi-purpose space, to just, have as an opportunity. So right now, there really isn't that kind of space in the school.
Okay. How much square footage are we talking here?
6,900 square feet of additions.
For the, but not just specific to
the student
the.
areas.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. The student.
Okay, we need to retalk this.
The student areas are virtually just hundreds of square feet, 300 to 400 square feet.
Okay.
Half of a classroom, if you want to visualize that.
Great, okay, thank you.
Mr. Convertito, did you have a question or a comment? Mrs. Kennelly?
One question, as you look at the options of these windows additioned roof, correct me if I'm wrong, but nowhere in here is factored in reimbursables.
No, not within these estimates. These are only looking at your capital costs. We do comment on the reimbursability of all of this in a general nature at the back of the report.
Because could that,
Within the waterfall chart, you'll see some
Right, I did.
calculations for that. And Mr. Cullen, I think in the past, has generally said that we're in the 20 to 21% category for projects, give or take.
No, the rate for Fairfield right now, I think is 26.07% for addition and renovations.
But we don't get that because
Windows
there's
and
all
roofs.
these rules about it, so the net rate might be closer to 20.
Right.
Yeah, but the nominal rate might be 26, but they deduct all kinds of things that they don't reimburse
Correct,
you
it's a
for.
little lower for roofs than for
Right.
windows.
that's the part I was wondering, is that, does it impact in terms of which we picked, what the rate of reimbursement is? You know, that, so in other words, windows or something would be reimbursed at a different rate than a roof, than an addition?
Not if it's all one large project filed with the state at one time. If it goes up to the state as a renovation and addition, windows and a roof, all as one big project, then it's looked at as a whole. If they go up as separate, they'll get separate rates.
I wonder if the board might give some guidance as to which page we're looking at and whether the discussion has suggested that perhaps the $11,630,700, which is the ed specs less the toilets, is that where we're heading or not? Can I get some sense from the board as to where they're
Want to go
heading?
around the table, or?
Mr. Convertito was pondering that question, right? He's not ready to make a comment. Where are we? Mr. Fattabine?
In general, I think I'm inclined to go in that direction, but can I ask a couple questions, too?
Please do.
My first question is, you have two schemes here. Does this cost estimate is for either scheme, is that accurate?
It is valid for either scheme, although the more efficient one, the one that has less of a burden, will be Scheme 2.
What do you mean by less of a burden doesn't equate to cost?
In that you don't have to build 3 stories of construction in Scheme 1. Scheme 2 is simpler. It uses existing courtyard space that you currently have, and most of these estimates truly do reflect the Scheme 2. That was the way the administrators and the architects were tending to favor in terms of its efficiency. Its science collaboration is better in Scheme 2. There are a bunch of operational benefits that are in Scheme 2 beyond dollars.
Right, it's a better design in
Correct.
your opinion. But as far as dollars, they're substantially equivalent.
They are substantially equivalent.
All right. So if the decision is what scheme to do wouldn't be based on dollars, it would be based on what's a better, more efficient.
Truly, your ed specs are program, not plan-driven.
Right. The next question I have is, I just want to get a better understanding or clarification as this, since the air conditioning cost is fairly substantial. In the ed specs, on the bottom of page 3, it was indicated what specifically was not included in the ed specs. And the two first bullet items are addition of mechanical fresh air systems in the existing building, and the other bullet item is addition of air conditioning in the existing building. So my understanding is that this air conditioning cost estimate is for that second bullet, addition of air conditioning in the existing building. Is that accurate?
Yes, but it will also resolve your fresh air at the same
Right, well,
time.
so that leads into my next question, was that, do we have a cost estimate for the addition of mechanical fresh air systems in the existing building without the air conditioning?
No, we were not asked to separate that cost.
We know approximately what portion of this 8.6 that would be, in rough numbers.
In rough numbers, it's $4.5 million.
Half the cost
A
approximately.
little bit more than half, correct.
All right, because actually, one of my thoughts was that, let me ask you another question. If you add the mechanical fresh air systems in the existing building, and put that in the construction cost today, would it then be cheaper in the future, should you decide to add air conditioning, to put the air conditioning in? Than if you had not included that ductwork or that fresh air systems and decided at a later point in date, well, we really need air conditioning, we're going to put it in now.
No, your better value is if you put the air conditioning in with the primary air handling systems now. It is physically possible to do it to separate them by years, but you are dealing with changing technologies that may limit your flexibility in adding the air conditioning 2 or 4 years later.
But I guess my question would be that if the ductwork is in there now for the fresh air systems, would that same ductwork be used in a future or potentially future air conditioning system?
The ductwork that we were to do now to benefit the systems?
In other words,
Yes.
if you do the additional mechanical fresh air systems in the existing building
Yes.
for the approximately $4 million, would that ductwork that is installed during the construction process, could it be utilized, it serves a purpose today during the construction process, but just fresh air?
Yes.
And if later down the road, one were to decide, well, that's not really adequate, and we really need to condition the air and have maybe air conditioning,
Yes.
would you save that cost of the ductwork, the $4.5 million, in later on, several years from now, putting in an air conditioning system? In other words, I'm getting some benefit today for fresh air, and tomorrow I may get benefit without losing anything by using that same ductwork for air conditioning.
Yeah, you cannot literally use the same ductwork. Air conditioning systems are larger, slightly larger duct sizes to deliver the volumes and the delta T that is required for air conditioning. So as you are designing the fresh air systems now, you should be making the decision whether you anticipate going to air conditioning in the future.
All right, so it's different sizes.
It is different, slightly different sizes. And to give you a sense, when we've done just ventilation for overheated floors, not so much the glass facade on the south, but overheated floors, it does provide some relief, up to 5 to 6 degrees of relief, so that those that have been in there and on the upper floors know how warm it is. I truly don't know. It gives you a sense that it is not the total relief that air conditioning can provide,
Certainly.
but does it make the spaces more educable? I think you'd have to ask the educators,
I
would
understand.
5 and 6 degrees make a difference?
All right, but you answered my primary question, which was the mechanical ductwork for the fresh air system is different sizing than the air conditioning, so you really can't utilize that ductwork for air conditioning, should you put it in today.
That's correct.
So is the board's, Mr. Convertito?
I guess through the chair to Mr. Cullen, we're due to put roofs on this building from 2012 through 2015. If we go out there in 2014 and 15 and start cutting holes in this roof to put air conditioning in, what's it going to do to our roof warranties?
It won't affect it because those contractors and engineers will be working with the roof manufacturer to properly design the right roof pitch pockets and everything around the equipment and where the cuts are made.
Okay, follow up to that, and a follow up to Mr. Fadabean's discussion. Sherman School, when we put in the fresh air circulating systems, we oversized the ducts so they could accommodate air conditioning at future times. Is that not correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
So what is the board's pleasure in terms of moving forward on the ed specs? Mr. Carey made the original motion. Do you have a thought that you'd like to?
I just want to
Start
make
us off.
sure my understanding is clear based on Ms. Kennelly's excellent point earlier. So if we're guesstimating conservatively a 20% reimbursement from the state on this project, at 11,630,700, that's $2,326,140 reimbursement. That would bring our net on the project down to 9,304,560. So is that the number that would end up getting plugged into this waterfall, if I understand what we're talking about correctly?
Well, we actually netted off the waterfall, so there's a gross, and then there's a reimbursement, and there's a net for each year. So the net cash flow is what flows into the waterfall, yes.
But in terms of a final authorization, I think the town has to authorize the gross
Yes.
so that it can make the project happen and then get the reimbursement.
Well, that's where I'm going. So right now, we have pegged for 2013-14, $8,961,700. So is the delta going to be 342,000, or the difference between the 8.9 and the 11 to 630 that we have to make up somewhere else? Are we making up $3 million or $300,000? Right now, I'm counting the 20% reimbursement. The 20% reimbursement brings that $11 million project down to 9.3 million.
But it's not all spent in that 1 year, see?
So it's over the multiple
It's
years.
multiple years. So it's still just spread out. So it doesn't all hit in 1 year, even though it's authorized in 1 year.
If I asked a general question, if we passed the 11,630,700, would that, as spaced out, fit into the waterfall chart? Maybe with some adjustments back and forth, but would that number be able to be fit into the waterfall chart?
Yes, is the answer.
Can I ask another question, follow up to that? What if you were to add in just the fresh air mechanical system, but building out bigger ductwork? Does that fit
Then you're
in?
going over.
Okay, so that doesn't work.
Right,
Okay.
right.
So
Yeah, unless you change another project, move it out.
take something out.
Right.
Okay.
At
So
this point, we're just trying to get the thing rolling to get something forward, because these projects have, for state reimbursement, a June 30th sort of deadline on them.
So you got to get them to all the bottom.
Right, so this has got to go through all the town bodies by June 30th in order to get onto the funding priority list for the next legislative session. So this has still got to move through all of the town bodies. So the question was, what do we want to bring forward for their consideration? There's still no guarantee that any segment of this will get approved, and this is just to get it off the table. So don't feel like you're making a final call here.
and they could lop it down too.
They can
so-
lop it down, too. They could say, we conceptually like the idea of bundling everything, because it does, we always get kind of, I don't know, some people get a little miffed when we do a project and then 2 years later you come back for another thing. Wait a minute, we just did that project. Well, so this is an attempt to sort of bundle it so they wouldn't really have to hear necessarily a lot about Ludlow for several years. But again, when you look at the price tag, you might say, well, we like bundling in theory, but we really like this broken up into pieces. So that's the dilemma that we have, so.
So my last question really, to the chair of the administration is I'm generally uncomfortable with the fact that we had a roof blow off this building.
Yeah.
I think that's a sign that we have to pay attention to that. I think we're very fortunate that didn't happen when we had staff and students in school.
That's true.
Am I being a nervous Nelly here? Would you
No,
like to see this roof happen now, too?
He said yes.
You're not being a nervous Nelly, but I don't want to sacrifice out on these windows. Remember, these windows, we did PCB testing on.
No, we're not gonna
Okay,
take the
so,
windows out. At least I'm not.
that's not a trade I really want to make. I think that we have to just space out the expenditures of this project so that the town can fit it into its bonding schedule, but I think that it's pretty clear from what Bill said that, the roof needs attention.
Mr. Chair, I'd be inclined to go with the 11, 630, 700, the addition, windows, and roof replacement based on what I've heard.
Then I think that would, the only change would be a friendly amendment, if both you and Mrs. Gerber were to accept it, would be that it would remove the renovation of student lavatories. That line on page 3 would be the only line that would get removed, because that's not, from the ed specs, because that's not part of the 11, 630, 700. Am
I'd be
I
happy
correct?
to accept that amendment.
Mr. Fattovine, did you understand that, or?
No, I understand what you're
Okay.
doing. I guess I would have my comment.
So-
I tend to agree with what makes the most sense in my mind is you certainly need the space, so you got to do the space. The windows have been in process for a while, so you're sort of in the process of doing the windows. It doesn't make sense not to do the roof. The roof is a requirement. My only concern, in a sense, is what I would like to see, if I'm trying to be practical, to have some sort of oversized ducting put in there, so in the future you can put in air conditioning, because I think that makes sense in the future. The only problem is that if we do that, we're going to have to take away another project. And the question is, what projects can have a more time delay and are not as sensitive. The high school project, in my opinion, isn't a priority. You have the over-enrollment now, you need that space today. So the question is, is it worth adding a few dollars or several millions of dollars to do proactive and forward-thinking to increase the size of the ductwork to, in the event you add it in the future, which my guess is 5 years from now, you probably are going to add it, in a sense. But what project to give up is the quandary, and I don't know if there's a good balance there as to what you could give up to accomplish that.
Ask the question, what they would bump?
Yeah, and I would ask
that's a problem.
Mr. Silva to confirm that it's, the number that you mentioned, about 50%, is simply to do the ductwork. If you were to then oversize it, it becomes more than the 50%. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct,
Yeah.
yes.
So we're being adding $4.5 million plus something to size it, just so that you, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
I realize the complexity, and in all likelihood, it's not going to be achievable. It's just my sort of dismay for not being able to.
So I think at the moment, we have a friendly amendment on the table to remove the renovation of student lavatories, and therefore adopt the ed specs at the 11,630,700 number, recognizing that we will be telling the town that the air conditioning / HVAC issues in the existing buildings and the toilets will have to come in a future phase, as yet to be determined, so that there's clarity on the board's part as to what we're acting on at the moment. Okay, so I don't see any objection to the friendly amendment, so that will be now considered the main motion, that it is adopting the ed specs without the renovation of student lavatories in it. Mr. Convertito.
So, I just want to be clear, on page 2, or page 3, we're going to cross out renovation of student lavatories?
And that's the only change. And I'll look to Mr. Cullen to confirm that our conversation, that's accurate, that's the only change in the document that is needed.
And
Thank you.
I have another question for Mr. Silver.
We'll want to get on to public comment, but you have Mrs. Iacona has one last question.
For Mr. Silver, is it going to cost more money to put in the ductwork? Are we ripping stuff out later on to put in this oversized ductwork? Am I going through ripping out ceilings and everything I've just put in? Am I better spending the money now or later?
Yeah, you are better spending money now when you do have a grip on costs, when you have confidence if the town is going to support it,
Right.
as opposed to speculating 5 years from now when they are weary of hearing of Ludlow High School.
Right. No,
and
no,
its
I
capital
understand that. Forget
improvements.
the present value of the dollar.
Perhaps to give you another sense too, as you do the window improvements, as we increase its R value by 4 times to make them better solar reflectors, absorbing winter heat but reflecting summer gain, probably putting on external shading devices so that we control the summer gain, and by adding insulation on your roof layers, you will be benefiting those spaces that are stifling, that are warm. We will be looking at window ventilation operability so that teachers can control their own spaces since they don't have air conditioning or ventilation. And a lot of times, teachers' ability to more freely control their ventilation leads to the perception of better comfort, as opposed to right now where your sliders don't work and other windows have their problems. So with the improvements that you are including, you will get comfort benefits that are easier to perceive than the harder to perceive duct ventilation or air conditioning options.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. Yes.
If I can go to public comment, so that the public might be aware, the ed specs that include the 2 science classrooms, the 4 general purpose classrooms, the cafeteria, teacher senior lounge, windows, lockers, and roofing is the major part of the project. It does not include the student lavatories or the HVAC in the existing building. There will actually, there will be new HVAC put in the addition because, of course, that's new space. So do I have members of the public that wish to comment? Please state your name.
Suzanne Misko, 123 Rygate Road.
I'm really disappointed. Thank you. Suzanne Miska, 123 Rygate Road. I'm disappointed that we seem to keep moving in directions of creating a checkbook system of solving issues. And I had the opportunity to walk through Ludlow at an open house recently with my 8th grader. I went to Ludlow in 1979, and I have to tell you, I did not recognize the school that I entered. I am concerned the school that I will be sending my son, regardless of what money you put into it. The configuration of that school, having been through whatever it has been through, is horrific. I don't know how those students will get out of that school if there's a fire. That said, when I got my tour and I walked up and down the flights of stairs because we were not allowed in Webster Hall, to see the senior lounge with ratty couches and a thing called the perch and a ping pong table, I question whether we're utilizing our space down there as best as we can. I also heard during the budget session that we were willing to look at a child's garden for a therapeutic daycare. Why aren't we looking at taking the early learning center out of Ward, putting it at a child's garden, figuring out the cost savings if there is any? And I know no one likes redistricting, but in the short term, that might be the direction you go. Ludlow, as it stands right now, I can't see where you're putting this addition in a school that is so broken up and full of stairwells that lead to nowhere. I really don't think this is the best use of $11.6 million. Please take the time to look at other cost incentives instead of just asking the taxpayers to keep paying this bill.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Miska. Please state your name.
Hi, Kathy Coyle, 84 Sherwood Farm Road in Fairfield. I'm very happy that you're actually looking at the ed specs tonight. It's been a long time coming. I believe the request for a building committee went out over a year ago. I think 14, 15 months ago, and Ludlow has been suffering patiently, waiting for help. I believe a lot of the windows were supposed to be replaced once Ludlow was reopened, and they haven't been. And then we found PCBs in them, and they're still not replaced, and our kids are still in there, in addition with the nursery school in there. There are just a number of issues, and we have been waiting very patiently, and it is affecting our education, and it makes me, I'm very concerned that because we've waited patiently, and now we have a very long list of things that need to be repaired or fixed or added, that now we're not going to get all of them. We have to pick which ones we're going to get, and it's just very concerning to me. In regards to the AC as well as the windows, you know, now's not the time that you would go. I would invite you to go to a class to sit on the 3rd floor that faces the tennis courts. The teachers, their hair is plastered with sweat to their heads. They can't open shut windows. If they turn down the blinds, it's not conducive to learning on the boards. It's really, they're working through it, but it's certainly not optimal, and we really need help. I really encourage you to push forward the ed specs and expedite them. And as we know, even if they are expedited, we're not going to see relief for over a year. And that's not really acceptable. So please consider all of the things on the list. I know it's a difficult economic time, but we have been waiting patiently, and we fully expect your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just state your name and address, please.
Christine Vitale, 254 Vernon Hill Road. I just want to reiterate what Mrs. Coyle said. It is hot in that school. I appreciate the price tag, but I think that you shouldn't diminish the heat, especially on the 3rd floor. Anyone who went to open house at Ludlow this, I think, past fall can attest to it. But I understand that the cost is significant. I'm a little concerned about how quickly we're just writing off the toilet upgrades. I think that It's important to appreciate the ADA guidelines, even though it's not a state statute. And if there is a bathroom in the school that someone who has a handicap can go to, maybe it's on the first floor and they're on the third floor, and I'm a little hesitant in how quickly we just wrote it off. So I would ask you to please reconsider the bathrooms and reconsider the air conditioning, but I do appreciate that's a lot to ask for. Thank you.
Thank you. No further public comment being heard. Back to the board. Any further conversation or comments from the board? Mr. Liu.
Thank you. I cannot vote for this. I do think we need a new roof at Ludlow High School. I do think we need to replace the windows, but because we're also trying to add additional space there without doing the proper type of exploration into how we can deal with this population in any other way, because we've skipped that step, I cannot vote for this amount of money at this time.
Other comments from board members? Are you ready to vote? Mrs. Kennelly.
Just one quick question. This has been an issue that's come up many times. Is there, through the chair to someone at administration, is there a reason that's not being pursued? Is that a topic that can be dealt with in any way or addressed in any way so that it can be, the idea of moving the ECC, I'm not saying I'm in favor, but we've heard it many times. Why can't we get it addressed?
The board, by a majority vote when it approved the long-range plan, approved this approach, and it would require a majority vote of the board to take a different action, and I know that a couple of people have expressed that viewpoint, but at the moment the majority of the board has not expressed that viewpoint. And so it would have to come up in discussion at a later meeting to see if that should happen, but it's not something that the board has been supportive of at the moment, although it's been discussed by individual members.
Well, it was more than just discussed.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time that we sent the request for a building project, building committee, over to the town, it was discussed at great length by the board before that was sent over there, and it was determined for a whole bunch of reasons that that was not the most prudent course of action. That's the Reader's Digest version.
Mrs. Iacona.
Well, it was discussed ad nauseum, and it's a space that was designed specifically for that program that we invested a tremendous amount of money in. Oldfield is not in our purview. We have no way of knowing if the town would even give it to us, and my guess is no. If I were to extrapolate all that out, sitting on this board and working on some of the different construction projects that we've had, you invested, what, $4 million to do that project over there? So that's a $4 million build how many years ago? 10? 8? 2005? Now you're going to need to find all that square footage at $4 million now, take that out. Heck, you could be up, you got to find a space, you got to locate it, you got to redo it. I love the idea of moving it and doing it. It's not that simple. It's probably going to cost more money to do that than it is to do this. This is the cheaper way to do it. So, you know, and I just want to add one thing, because now the whole big, why don't we just redistrict thing is going to come up. Mrs. Gerber, I see you have the pink sheets there. Do you know the numbers on Ward and Ludlow and what would happen if we were to redistrict? Do you have that?
Yeah. The difference between the two high schools this year and next year is 122 students between Ludlow and Ward High School. Both schools, Ludlow is over capacity. Both schools' capacities are 1,400. Next year, Ward's will be also over 1,400. If you have 122 students, and let's say you want to make it even, which would be ideal, because otherwise you're just moving the problem to Ward, you would split 122 by 2, which is 61 over 4 grades. That's 15 students per grade. You're going to redistrict to get everything even. That does not make any sense to me at all. I mean, and even if you could find a neighborhood or two to do that for 1 or 2 years, we all know that demographics of neighborhoods change. So in a couple of years, whatever neighborhood we chose to pluck 60 students
Gerber?
from. Yeah.
We're debating issues that are not part of this motion. The only way to get to those issues is if the board were to reject this motion. So I'd ask that we stay with comments on the motion that's on the table and not relitigating the redistricting or the early childhood or any other fashion. On this motion, Mr. Liu.
Just since it was brought up that it wouldn't be economically feasible, basically, these are all theories. Good theories, possibly, but they're theories based on one board's member's opinion. We have not seen a real breakdown, and that is all this board member is asking for. Let's look at a breakdown. Let's look at the different ways to see what cost benefit works best for us, especially in this extremely excruciating,
Point of
difficult
order, Mr. Chair.
economic time.
This has been discussed 2 years ago, and
Mr. Carey.
with all due respect,
Mr. Carey, please. There have been alternative views put forth to
But
Mr.
you cut,
Liu's.
point of order,
Excuse
yes,
me.
you cut off Mrs. Gerber, you're allowing Mr. Liu to go, and now you're cutting off Mr. Carey. I'd like to move to call the question.
I'll second that.
It's non-debatable.
The motion has been called. All in favor, raise your hand, saying aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 votes opposed. 1, 2, 6 to 2, the motion passes. We're back to the main motion.
All in favor?
We're back to the main motion to call the motion.
Oh, right.
So the main motion, as you know, is that the Board of Education approve the Fairfield-Ludlow High School educational specifications with the only change to the document in front of you, removing the renovation of student lavatories. And we know what the budget number is for that, although that is not part of the motion itself. All in favor, raise your hand, saying aye. Mrs. Kennelly, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Gerber, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Iacono, Mr. Fattabine, Mr. Carey. Opposed? Mr. Liu. The motion passes. We're on to new business. However, this item will be moved on to another agenda. You each received the email that came to the Board of Education. I had asked for some documentation that was not yet available in terms of the bylaws of the Cable Advisory Council, which is not the Fair TV Operational Council, so that we would know that indeed the Board of Ed did have a space and could appoint somebody before we even talked about whether we should or not. And so we'll defer this to another meeting, after which when I get the documents in question. Any questions on that topic? Public comments and petitions. Anybody that wishes to address the board on other matters?
Dawn Llewellyn, 524 Sturgis Road. Repeatedly, parents have been telling administrators that their kids are struggling and outside tutoring is needed due to the lack of response. Excuse me, an overgrowing group of parents have diligently researched the math program CPM and made inquiries in other districts that at one time used the program. Last week, parents were sent a new empirical study. You have asked for new data showing why this program might not work. And it was published by a superintendent in Illinois. He completed a statistical analysis of CPM curriculum for Zion Benton High School class of 2014 using ACT's Educational Planning Assessment System. With a cohort of Zion Benton High School students who strictly use CPM, this longitudinal study found the following. Entering freshman year, 39.3% of the students were meeting college readiness benchmarks. Now, we all know this number should be improving as the children go through their high school math. However, as at Benton High School, the opposite occurred. In their sophomore year, the percentage meeting college readiness benchmarks dropped by 11%. By junior year, the percentage meeting college readiness benchmarks dropped another 10%. After 2 years of CPM math, only 18.7% were meeting these benchmarks. CPM lowered test scores as well as widened the gap among students, as proven through an increase in the standard deviation. And our district is trying to narrow this gap. The main findings of this report show student exposure to CPM curriculum does not result in improved college readiness performance over the 2 years examined. In fact, the gap doubles during the freshman year and quadruples during the sophomore year between performance and college readiness benchmarks.
Mrs. Llewellyn, your 2 minutes is up.
Okay, can I just give you the last part?
No,
I just
the last
recommend
sentence.
that CPM and other fuzzy math not be considered for our district's math curriculum. And I'm not sure how our administrators were planning on analyzing the implemented CPM.
Mrs. Llewellyn, you've made your last sentence. Thank you.
Okay.
I do need to stay with consistency for all public input. Do we have another member of the public that wishes to speak? Please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Wendy Cohen-Urim. I live at 12 Park Drive. I'm here to address the school calendar, specifically the planning of the significant events associated with the end of the school year. Plans for the summer of 2013 happen months, if not a full year in advance. Fairfielders rely on the publication of the school calendar to ensure the ending of school does not conflict with such plans. The approved 2012-2013 calendar stated that the last possible day of school would be June 21st. Many Fairfielders use this information to make their summer plans and now have commitments that begin as early as June 21st. I hope the board will take this into consideration. I hope the board will take into consideration the fact that many of these plans involve non-refundable tickets, reservations, tuitions for summer programs, as well as requested vacation days from work. I hope you can appreciate the significant dilemma that the newly adopted last possible day of school, now June 28th, creates. I understand the board was placed in an incredibly difficult situation with the loss of school days from Hurricane Sandy and Winter Storm Nemo. I'm here to request that the board ensure that all momentous events and celebrations, including graduations, moving up ceremonies, awards assemblies, field days, etc., are scheduled prior to June 21st, the original last possible day of school. I thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public that wish to address us at this time? Seeing nobody approaching the microphone, back to the board. Any open board comment? I would only make two comments. The budget hearings, the combined Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance budget hearing will be March 5th at 7 p.m. And the more the merrier to encourage that body to move our budget forward. And the second comment is that each of you got a note about Dr. Title's celebrity lunch that is coming up. He's invited you to join him. Well, he's one of the celebrities. He's invited you to join him, so please make sure that you respond to Meg so that she's not having to chase you down. Any other comments from the board?
Motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Mrs. Kennelly, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Adjourned we are.